The world is gray. It is a world drawn in charcoal and slate, a sprawling landscape of muted tones where the sky and the earth seem to merge into a single, heavy curtain of winter. There is no sun here, or at least, not a sun that offers warmth. It is merely a pale, diffused light hidden behind layers of thick, woolen clouds that stretch endlessly from one horizon to the other. The date is December 19th in the year of 1777, and the air is still, save for the biting edge of a wind that whispers through the bare branches of the oak and hickory trees. It is a quiet day, a heavy day, pressing down on the rolling hills of Pennsylvania with the weight of the season. The ground is hard. It has frozen into a rigid, unforgiving surface, a tapestry of rutted mud turned to stone and patches of old, granulated snow that cling to the shadows of the ravines. If you were to look at this scene, captured in the soft, textured strokes of a colored pencil on dark, rough paper, you would see the deep blues of the twilight beginning to bleed into the edges of the frame. The light is fading, slowly, inevitably, draining the color from the trees and the rocks, leaving behind only silhouettes and shadows. And moving through this landscape like a slow, dark river of ink is the army. They are moving west, away from the city, away from the comfort of established hearths, moving towards a place that is not yet a place, but merely a set of coordinates on a map, a collection of wooded hills and open fields near the confluence of the Schuylkill River and the Valley Creek. They are moving towards Valley Forge. The movement is slow. It is agonizingly rhythmic. There is no fanfare, no drum beating a cadence for glory, no flag snapping crisply in a breeze. There is only the sound of thousands of feet striking the frozen earth. It is a dull, hollow thudding sound, a low vibration that travels through the ground, a heartbeat of exhaustion. The column stretches for miles, a jagged line of humanity wrapped in the tattered remnants of uniforms. The visual is one of texture, the rough weave of homespun wool, the fraying edges of linen, the cracked leather of belts that have been tightened too many times. The colors are faded. The distinct blue of the Continental coats has dulled to a dusty gray blue, obscured by the grime of the road and the smoke of countless campfires. Browns, tans, and the stained white of breeches blend together into a somber palette that matches the winter woods. Focus closely on the ground. The camera of the mind zooms in, slow and steady, until the frame is filled only with the earth and the feet that traverse it. This is the army without shoes. It is a detail that defines the moment, a detail etched in history but felt here as a physical reality. Many of the men walk with feet wrapped in rags, strips of old blankets or shirts torn into bandages to bind the soles against the ice. The fabric is worn thin, dark with mud and moisture. Others wear shoes that are falling apart, the leather soles flapping loosely, held together by twine or hope. And some, far too many, walk with nothing at all. Their bare feet are red and raw, the skin calloused and cracked, moving over the sharp ridges of the frozen mud. There is a strange, hypnotic pattern to the walking. Step, drag, step, drag. The cold has seeped into the very bones of the men, making their joints stiff, their movements mechanical. They do not look left or right. Their heads are bowed, chins tucked deep into collars or scarves to protect faces from the biting wind. The breath of the army rises above the column like a low mist, a collective exhalation of steam that lingers for a moment in the freezing air before dissipating into the gray sky. It is the only sign of heat in this frozen tableau. The steam rises in rhythmic puffs, synchronized with the trudging steps, a visual representation of life persisting in a landscape that seems determined to extinguish it. The wind picks up just slightly. It is not a gale, but a steady, persistent draft that flows down from the northern hills. It carries the scent of dry leaves, of pine needles, and the metallic tang of impending snow. It rustles the dry, brown oak leaves that still cling stubbornly to the branches above, creating a sound like paper crumpling. The sound is dry and rasping, a whisper of friction that overlays the thud of the marching feet. In the distance, a crow calls out, a harsh, singular note that echoes through the empty woods, emphasizing the vast silence that surrounds the column. The bird is a speck of black ink against the slate sky, circling once before disappearing behind the tree line. The landscape of Pennsylvania in December is a study in dormancy. The fields are brown and stubbled with the remains of the harvest, long since gathered. The grass is matted down, pale and brittle, crunching softly if stepped upon. The trees are skeletons, their architecture revealed in stark lines against the sky. The bark of the walnut trees is deep and furrowed, holding the shadows. The smooth, gray skin of the beech trees looks like stone. Every surface is cold to the touch. If you were to place a hand against the trunk of a maple tree here, it would feel like touching a block of ice, a solid, unyielding cold that drains the warmth from your fingertips instantly. The army moves along the Gulf Road. It is a narrow track, deeply rutted by the passage of wagons that have gone before. The ruts are frozen solid, creating treacherous ridges that twist ankles and catch the edges of the rag-wrapped feet. The wagons of the baggage train creak and groan, their wooden wheels protesting the uneven ground. The sound is a low, rhythmic squeal of wood on wood, wood on iron. It is a lonely sound. The horses, heads low, breath steaming, pull with slow, heavy muscular movements. Their coats are thick and shaggy, matted with dust. You can see the steam rising from their flanks, the only other source of warmth in the twilight. The harness leather creaks, the metal bits clink softly. It is a symphony of weariness. As the light begins to fail, the shadows lengthen. The trees cast long, distorted shapes across the road and the fields, bars of darkness that the soldiers must step over. The visual style shifts. The charcoal lines become heavier, the shading deeper. The blue of the sky deepens to a bruised purple, then to a dark, desaturated indigo. The lantern light has not yet appeared. The world is suspended in the gloaming, that period of time where shapes become indistinct and the eyes play tricks. A bush becomes a crouching figure, a rock becomes a sleeping animal. The cold seems to intensify with the darkness. It creates a physical pressure, a weight that settles on the shoulders of the men. There is no talking in the ranks. Conversation takes energy, and energy is a precious resource that cannot be wasted. The silence is profound. It is a silence born of endurance, of a shared understanding that there is nothing to say that hasn't already been said by the wind and the cold. The only communication is the occasional shifting of a musket, the adjustment of a pack's straps. The muskets are heavy, long iron barrels cold enough to burn the skin. The wood of the stocks is smooth, polished by handling, but cold as stone. The men hold them with gloved hands, or hands wrapped in wool, or bare hands that have lost all feeling. The sensation of numbness is gradual. It starts in the toes, a tingling that slowly fades into a dull absence of feeling. It moves up the feet into the ankles. It touches the fingertips, making them clumsy. It stiffens the nose and the ears. The men are walking within their own bodies, retreating inward to the core, keeping the spark of consciousness alive while the extremities become part of the frozen world outside. They are walking in a trance. The rhythm of the march is the only thing that keeps them moving. If they were to stop, to sit down on the side of the road, the sleep would come. The deep, dangerous sleep of hypothermia, they know this. So they keep moving, step, step, drag. To the observer looking down from a high vantage point, perhaps a hawk perched on a high branch, the army looks like a bruised vein running through the pale flesh of the winter landscape. It winds around the base of a hill, follows the curve of a frozen creek, and disappears into the deepening woods. The creek is the Valley Creek. The water is dark, almost black, flowing silently between banks of ice. Thin sheets of ice have formed near the edges, fragile and crystalline, etched with delicate white patterns like frost on a window pane. The center of the stream is open, the water moving sluggishly, carrying fallen leaves that drift like small boats on a dark ocean. The destination, Valley Forge, is not a town. It is a natural bowl, a plateau protected by hills on one side and the river on the other. It is a place of strategic value, high enough to defend, close enough to watch the British in Philadelphia, yet far enough to be safe from a sudden raid. But tonight it is just a cold, empty forest. There are no houses here for the men, no barracks waiting with warm fires. There is only the woods. The trees that stand there, massive oaks, tall poplars, chestnuts, are both the enemy and the savior. They block the wind, but they also block the view. They must be cut down to build the city of huts that will eventually rise here. But for now, they are silent sentinels, watching the arrival of the ghosts. The vanguard of the column begins to slow. The orders are passed down the line, not with shouts but with low murmurs. Halt! Halt! The word travels back like a ripple through water. The thudding of feet stops. The silence that follows is sudden and immense. The creaking of the wagon ceases. The horses blow out their breath, shaking their heads, the harness jingling. The men stand still. They do not immediately sit. To sit is to invite the cold to settle fully. They stand, swaying slightly, their breath rising in vertical columns. They look around at the darkening woods. This is it. This is the place. Imagine the texture of the bark on the trees surrounding them. Rough, deep fissures, covered in patches of pale green lichen that looks gray in the twilight. The ground is covered in a carpet of dead leaves, millions of them brown and curled, frozen into a solid mass. Underneath the leaves is the hard earth. There is no softness anywhere. The soldiers shift their weight. The pain in their feet begins to return as the blood flow changes, a dull throbbing that replaces the numbness. It is a different kind of agony, the agony of circulation returning to damaged tissue. The visual scene darkens further. We are now in the realm of night. The sky is a deep, velvety black, though the stars are hidden by the overcast clouds. The only light comes from the snow on the ground, which reflects the faint ambient light of the atmosphere, creating a spectral, ghostly glow. It is a vintage-colored pencil darkness, where the black is not solid, but composed of layers of dark blue, dark gray, and burnt umber, hatched and cross-hatched to create depth. Into this darkness, the first sparks are struck. Flint strikes steel. A tiny, fleeting orange spark jumps into a nest of dry tinder. It is a violent, beautiful moment of color in the monochromatic world. Another strike. The tinder catches. A small curl of smoke, invisible in the dark but pungent to the smell, rises. A flame appears, small and fragile, dancing in the wind. It grows, fed by dry leaves and twigs. The light from the fire pushes back the shadows, creating a circle of warmth and illumination. The colors change. The faces of the men near the fire are suddenly painted in warm tones of orange and yellow. The deep shadows of their eye sockets and hollow cheeks are exaggerated by the low angle of the light. This is the chiaroscuro effect, the dramatic contrast between the light and the dark. More fires begin to bloom along the line of the encampment. They appear one by one, like stars igniting on the ground since none are visible in the sky. The smell of wood smoke begins to fill the air, replacing the crisp scent of the snow. It is the smell of green wood, burning smoky and thick, stinging the eyes. But it is heat. The men crowd around the small fires, holding out their hands. The palms of their hands are black with dirt, the fingers red with cold. They stand close, shoulder to shoulder, forming a wall of bodies to trap the heat. The firelight flickers on the metal buttons of their coats, on the barrels of their muskets stacked in pyramids nearby. The wind shifts again, swirling the smoke. It blows the smoke into the faces of the men, but they do not move. They merely squint their eyes and turn their heads slightly. The warmth is worth the smoke. The firelight reveals the details of their clothing more clearly now. The patches on the elbows, the missing buttons, the fabric worn so thin it looks like gauze. We see the faces of boys, barely 16, smooth and pale. We see the faces of older men, weathered and lined like old leather, their beards frosted with ice from their own breath. There is a stoicism in their expressions. No despair, no joy, just presence. They are here. They have arrived. The ground around the fires begins to thaw slightly, turning the frozen surface into a slick, greasy mud. The men shift their feet in the mud. Those with shoes try to scrape the mud off. Those without shoes try to keep their feet on the edges of the firelight, near the warmth but away from the flames. The contrast between the freezing darkness just a few feet away and the small circle of light is absolute. To step away from the fire is to step back into the void. The sounds of the camp settling in begin to emerge. The clatter of a metal pot, the thud of a heavy pack being dropped, the rustle of blankets being unrolled. There are no tents for most of the men. The tents were left behind or lost or simply never existed. They will sleep under the stars or under the clouds. They will sleep on the ground. Some men break off pine boughs to create a layer between themselves and the earth. The snap of the green wood is loud in the quiet night. The smell of crushed pine needles mixes with the smoke. It is a sharp, resinous scent, a scent of the deep forest. The camera pans slowly across the encampment. It is a disorganized sprawl of fires and huddled figures stretching along the gentle slope of the hill. In the distance, the shape of Mount Joy and Mount Misery, the two hills that define the geography of the camp, loom as darker masses against the night sky. The names of the hills seem prophetic, etched into the landscape long before this army arrived. Joy and misery. Tonight, there is little joy. There is only the relief of stopping. The exhaustion is a physical weight. It pulls at the eyelids. It makes the limbs feel like lead. The men chew on hardtack dry biscuits that are as hard as the stones on the road. They dip them in water or snow to soften them. The sound of chewing is slow. There is little meat. Maybe a piece of salt pork, tough and stringy. They eat because they must, not because there is pleasure in it. The firelight casts dancing shadows behind them, stretching their figures into giants that sway against the tree trunks. The air grows colder as the night deepens. The temperature drops steadily. The dampness in the air turns to frost. You can see the frost forming on the wool of the coats, a fine dusting of white powder that glitters faintly in the firelight. It forms on the eyebrows of the men, on the hair that escapes their hats. They are slowly being encased in the winter. The visual texture becomes one of crystallization. The soft pastel strokes of the drawing become sharper, more defined by the white highlights of the frost. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse whinnies, a lonely sound that speaks of the same cold the men are feeling. The animals are tethered to the trees, their blankets thrown over them, but they too are shivering. The army is a singular organism composed of men and beasts, all huddled against the indifference of the elements. The wind moves through the tops of the trees with a sound like the ocean, a roaring, rushing sound that seems miles away, yet the air at ground level is still, held in the bowl of the hills. The first hour of the encampment passes. The initial flurry of activity, the gathering of wood, the lighting of fire slows down. The men settle. They wrap themselves in whatever they have. Blankets are shared. 2 men, 3 men huddle together under a single thin wool covering, sharing body heat. They lie on the pine boughs or on their knapsacks or directly on the frozen leaves. The ground is hard and uneven. Roots dig into backs. Stones press into hips. But the exhaustion is stronger than the discomfort. The breathing of the camp slows down. It becomes a collective rhythm again, deep and slow. The visual focus returns to the feet. Near a dying fire, a pair of bare feet sticking out from under a gray blanket. They are motionless. The skin is pale, almost blue in the low light. A dusting of snow has begun to fall, tiny distinct flakes that land on the dark skin and do not melt immediately. The snow is starting. It is a light snow, dry and powdery. It falls silently, adding a new layer of texture to the scene. It falls on the hats, on the shoulders, on the stacked muskets. It falls on the embers of the fires, hissing softly as it touches the heat. The narrator's voice, if there were one, but here there is only the text, would lower to a whisper. The scene is static, like a painting that breathes. The composition is balanced between the dark masses of the woods and the small, fragile pools of warm light. The deep blue tones of the paper dominate, creating a sense of immense, crushing cold. The warm ochre and burnt sienna of the firelight are small islands of survival. This is the beginning. This is the first night of the winter encampment. There are no log cabins yet, no streets, no hospitals. There is only the army and the woods. The waiting has begun. The endurance has begun. The wind whispers through the branches, a sibilant sound that weaves through the sleeping men. S-H-H-H-H-H-H. It sounds like a command to sleep or perhaps a warning. The snow falls a little faster now, blurring the edges of the vision, softening the sharp lines of the trees. The charcoal lines smudge. The world softens into a gray haze. The cold is a blanket. It covers everything. It creates a silence that is heavy and absolute. The only sound is the crackle of a log shifting in a fire, sending a shower of sparks spiraling upward into the dark, where they fade and die before they reach the treetops. The smoke rises straight up, a gray pillar connecting the earth to the sky. The soldiers of the Continental Army sleep, or try to sleep, on the frozen floor of Pennsylvania. The shoes they do not have are not missed in sleep, for in sleep there is no marching. There is only the stillness. The camera pulls back slowly, rising up through the branches of the trees, up past the roosting birds, up into the gray, snowy sky. The fires below become small dots of orange, a constellation of warmth in a universe of cold. The hills of Valley Forge embrace the army, holding them in the dark bowl of the night. The river flows silently nearby. The wind continues its journey from the north. The first part of the long winter night has settled. The stillness is complete. The night does not pass quickly. It is a slow, heavy thing, a physical presence that sits upon the chest of the valley. Time here is not measured in minutes or hours, but in the gradual accumulation of frost and the slow consumption of wood by the fires. The darkness is thick and textured, like layers of heavy felt pressed against the eyes. The snow that began as a light dusting has persisted, falling in a steady, silent curtain that softens the edges of the world. It covers the ruts in the road, filling the scars of the wagons until the ground is smooth and white again. It covers the shoulders of the sleeping men, turning the huddled masses into strange, white mounds that resemble boulders or fallen logs. If you were to look at this scene through the lens of the artistic style, the vintage colored pencil on dark paper, the white of the snow would be applied with a heavy hand, thick strokes of cream and titanium white that stand out starkly against the deep indigo of the paper. The shadows are profound, pools of black ink where the firelight cannot reach. The fires themselves have changed. They are no longer the roaring, crackling beacons of the early evening. They have settled into beds of glowing coals, pulsating with a deep, rhythmic red heat. The logs have broken apart, revealing their burning hearts, the wood grain glowing like molten gold. Occasionally, a piece of wood shifts with a soft hiss, sending a tiny flurry of sparks drifting upward, where they are immediately extinguished by the falling snow. The smoke hangs low, trapped by the heavy air and the canopy of the trees. It forms a blue-gray ceiling just above the heads of the sleeping men, a spectral haze that blurs the lines of the forest. The smell is intense, the acrid, biting scent of wood smoke mixed with the metallic tang of snow and the damp, earthy smell of wet wool. Around these dying fires, the sentries stand. They are the only moving figures in this frozen tableau, and even their movement is minimal. They stamp their feet, a slow, muffled thudding against the snow-packed earth, trying to keep the blood flowing in their toes. They shift their muskets from one shoulder to the other, the metal of the barrels frosted white. Their breath comes in long, slow plumes of steam that obscure their faces for a moment before drifting away. They are wrapped in everything they own, blankets draped over coats, scarves wound multiple times around necks, hats pulled down low. Their eyes are fixed on the darkness beyond the light, watching the trees, watching the shadows. But nothing moves out there. The woods are asleep, locked in the same frozen stasis as the army. The silence is the dominant force. It is not an empty silence, but a heavy, pressure-filled silence. It absorbs sound. The snap of a twig is muffled. The cough of a sleeping soldier is swallowed by the air. The wind has dropped to a mere whisper, a ghostly draft that moves through the upper branches of the oaks without shaking them. It is a stillness that feels ancient, as if this valley has been waiting in this state of suspended animation for centuries, merely tolerating the temporary intrusion of the men. The cold is a living thing here. It seeks out every gap in the clothing, every tear in the fabric. It creeps under the blankets. It presses against the skin like a cold iron weight. As the night wears on, the temperature continues to drop. The mud that had thawed around the fires in the evening freezes again, turning into a jagged, uneven surface of rock-hard earth. The moisture in the air crystallizes. The blankets of the men become stiff with frost, freezing into rigid shapes that hold the form of the bodies underneath. To move is to crack the shell of ice that has formed. So the men do not move. They lie still, huddled together in their messes, groups of 6 or 8 men sharing their body heat, locked in a desperate embrace against the winter. They are a single organism of survival, breathing in unison. Slowly, imperceptibly, the quality of the darkness begins to change. It is not yet dawn, but the deep, velvety black of the night begins to dilute. It shifts to a dark charcoal, then to a deep slate gray. The light does not come from the sun, which is still hidden far below the horizon, but seems to seep out of the snow itself, a cold, reflected luminescence. The trees begin to regain their individual shapes. The massive trunks of the white oaks stand out like pillars of iron against the gray sky. The tangled brush of the undergrowth becomes a network of black lines, a chaotic scribbling of charcoal on the page. This is the blue hour, the coldest part of the night, the hour before the dawn. The fires are at their lowest, mere piles of gray ash with a faint red glow at the center. The cold is absolute. It hurts to breathe. The air entering the lungs feels like swallowed glass. The sentries are coated in white, their eyebrows thick with frost, their beards stiff icicles. They look like statues carved from ice and wool. The silence is broken by the sound of a branch snapping somewhere deep in the woods, a sharp, gunshot crack caused by the freezing sap expanding inside the wood. It echoes once, then is gone. Then the first gray light of morning touches the tops of the hills. It is a colorless dawn. There is no pink, no orange, no warmth, just a lifting of the curtain revealing the world in shades of gray and white. The sky is a flat, uniform sheet of steel. The clouds are low and heavy, promising more snow. The valley is revealed in all its stark desolation. The rolling hills are covered in the white quilt of the night's snowfall. The trees are black skeletons. And scattered across the ground, like debris left by a retreating tide, is the army. The camp begins to stir. It is a slow, painful awakening. A figure sits up, the blanket crusted with snow falling away from his shoulders. He rubs his face with gloved hands, the wool scratching the skin. He coughs, a harsh, hacking sound that tears at the throat. Another man stirs, then another. The mounds of snow begin to break apart, revealing the blue and brown of the uniforms. There is no reveille, no bugle call this morning. The cold is the alarm. The need for fire is the command. Men crawl out from their huddles, their joints stiff and creaking. They move like old men, hunched and shivering. They reach for the wood that was gathered the night before, breaking the smaller branches to feed the dying embers. They blow on the coals, their cheeks puffing out, their breath fueling the glow. A wisp of smoke rises, then a flame. The fire is reborn. It is the most important thing in the world. The men crowd around the growing flames, holding their hands so close that the skin turns red, trying to drive the cold from their bones. They turn slowly, like meat on a spit, heating one side and then the other. There is no breakfast, or very little. Some men have a handful of flour which they mix with water to make a paste, baking it on a flat stone heated by the fire. It is a fire cake, a tasteless, unleavened biscuit that sits heavy in the stomach. Others have only water, perhaps boiled with a few pine needles for flavor, or a piece of dry hardtack left over from days ago. They eat in silence, their eyes fixed on the flames, chewing slowly. The hunger is a dull, constant ache, a companion that has been with them for so long it is hardly noticed anymore. It is just another part of the landscape, like the cold and the snow. The visual focus shifts to the details of the morning. The texture of the snow is grainy and dry. Where the men have walked, the snow is packed down into slippery, translucent ice. The bark of the trees is wet with melting frost where the sun, if it were visible, might hit it. The metal of the canteens and muskets is dull and gray, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. The mood is somber, heavy, and resigned. There is work to be done. General Washington has issued orders. The army must shelter itself. They cannot survive another night in the open like this. They must build a city, not of tents, for there are none, but of wood. They are to build log huts. But before the huts can be built, before the trees can be felled and notched and stacked, they must make temporary shelter. They must build brush huts, bowers made of branches and leaves, to break the wind and hold off the snow while the real construction begins. The sound of the morning changes. The silence is replaced by the rhythmic sound of iron striking wood. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It starts with a few axes, then spreads until the whole valley echoes with the sound. It is a chaotic, syncopated rhythm, 1,000 drummers beating on wooden drums. The men move into the woods, their axes in hand. These are felling axes, heavy heads of iron on smooth hickory handles. The handles are cold, sucking the heat from the hands even through gloves. Watch the motion of the chop. The soldier plants his feet in the snow, finding purchase on the slippery ground. He lifts the axe, the heavy head rising above his shoulder. He swings it down, putting the weight of his back into the blow. The blade bites into the wood of a sapling. A white chip flies out, spinning through the air. He swings again. The cut deepens. The smell of fresh sap fills the air. It is a sharp, clean smell, green and vital, contrasting with the dead smell of the smoke. The tree shudders. Another swing. The tree falls, crashing softly into the undergrowth, bringing down a shower of snow from its neighbors. The work is warming. As the men swing the axes, the blood begins to pump. The numbness in the fingers recedes, replaced by the sting of blisters and the ache of muscles. They sweat inside their wool coats. The sweat turns cold the moment they stop moving, so they do not stop. They strip the branches from the fallen trees. They cut the boughs of hemlock and cedar, the needles dark green and glossy. The ground becomes littered with green debris, a carpet of fresh needles on top of the white snow. The construction of the brush huts is crude. They are little more than lean-tos, frames of sticks lashed together with vines or strips of bark, covered with layers of evergreen boughs. They look like animal dens, low and dark. The men work in teams, dragging the branches through the snow, the needles leaving sweeping tracks behind them. The sound of dragging brush is a constant shhhhshhhh sound, like a giant broom sweeping the forest floor. The focus zooms in on the hands of a soldier weaving the branches. The skin is rough, cracked at the knuckles, stained with dirt and pitch. The pitch is sticky and black, gluing the fingers together, impossible to wash off in the freezing water. The hands move with a practiced dexterity, overlapping the boughs so that the water will run off, interlocking the needles to create a windbreak. It is an ancient skill, this weaving of shelter, a memory from a time before houses, reawakened by necessity. The light of the day does not improve. It remains a flat slate gray. The sun is a vague, brighter patch in the clouds that move slowly across the sky, offering no heat. The wind picks up again in the afternoon, blowing the snow from the branches, swirling the wood chips around the feet of the workers. It bites at the exposed faces, turning noses and ears a raw, angry red. The men pull their hats down tighter. They work with their heads down, focusing only on the wood, on the axe, on the next branch. The camp begins to take on a new texture. Amidst the vertical lines of the standing trees, new diagonal and horizontal lines appear. The skeletons of the brush huts rise from the snow. They are ragged, uneven structures blending into the forest. They look organic, like piles of debris, but they offer a small pocket of still air. Inside, the ground is cleared of snow and covered with a thick mattress of pine tips. The smell inside is strong, pine resin and damp earth. It is a small improvement, a tiny victory against the exposure. The day feels interminable. The chopping continues. The dragging continues. The smoke from the fires drifts through the trees, stinging the eyes. The men's eyes are red-rimmed and watery, tearing constantly from the smoke and the cold wind. Tears track through the soot on their faces, leaving pale streaks. They wipe them away with dirty sleeves, smearing the grime. There is little conversation. The energy required to talk is better spent swinging the axe. Occasionally, a command is shouted by an officer, a harsh bark that cuts through the dull thudding of the axes. Keep the line. Clear that brush. The voices sound thin and fragile in the vast open air. As the afternoon wears on, the exhaustion returns. The burst of energy from the morning's work fades, replaced by a deep, grinding weariness. The muscles, fueled by almost nothing, begin to fail. The swings of the axes become slower, less accurate. Men stumble over roots they would have stepped over an hour ago. They drop their loads of brush and have to stop to pick them up, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold creeps back in as the sweat cools. The damp wool of their clothes feels like icy armor. The landscape is changing. The dense forest is being thinned. Gaps appear in the canopy where trees have been felled, allowing the gray light to reach the ground more fully. The ground is churned up, a mixture of mud, snow, and wood chips. It is a scene of organized destruction, the army carving a place for itself out of the wilderness. The visual palette is dominated by the dark brown of the tree trunks, the white of the snow, the deep green of the pine boughs, and the gray of the sky. It is a muted, somber picture, drawn with heavy, tired strokes. Near the center of the camp, the forge wagons have been set up. The blacksmiths are at work, repairing the tools that break against the frozen hardwood. The ring of the anvil adds a high-pitched, metallic note to the soundscape. Clang, clang, clang. It is a sharper, more piercing sound than the axes. The glow of the forge fire is intense, a bright orange eye in the gloom. The smiths are silhouettes against the fire, their arms rising and falling. Sparks fly in showers, bright and fleeting, dying as they hit the snow. The smell of hot iron and burning coal mixes with the wood smoke. The day begins to fade. It happens early in the valley. The shadows creep out from the base of the hills, stretching across the snow. The gray sky deepens to purple, then to the familiar charcoal of the coming night. The chopping slows. The men look up, gauging the light. They gather their tools. They drag the last loads of brush to their huts. The work is not done. It will not be done for weeks, but the light is gone. The truce with the forest ends for the day. The men retreat into their new shelters. They crawl into the brush huts, moving on hands and knees. Inside, it is dark and cramped, but the wind is gone. The thick walls of evergreen boughs block the draft. The body heat of 6 men huddled together begins to warm the small space. It is not warm, but it is warmer than outside. It is a different kind of cold, a still, damp cold, rather than a biting, wind-driven cold. Outside, the fires are built up again for the night. The circle of life contracts once more to the ring of firelight. The snow begins to fall again, as if the sky had been waiting for the activity to stop. It falls on the half-built huts, on the piles of logs, on the fresh stumps of the trees. It covers the wood chips, hiding the evidence of the day's labor. The world is being reset to white. The men sit at the openings of their huts, their feet towards the fires. They take off their boots, if they have them, to dry their socks. The steam rises from the wet wool. They inspect their feet. The blisters from the march are now joined by blisters from the axes. The skin is white and puckered from the dampness. They rub their feet, trying to restore sensation. Pain is a good sign. It means the flesh is still alive. Numbness is the enemy. The evening meal is the same as the morning. Fire cake and water. Perhaps a kettle of soup made from a few distinct beans and water passed around the circle. The liquid is hot, and that is its primary virtue. It warms the stomach, sending a fleeting wave of comfort through the body. The spoons scrape against the bottom of the kettle, a hollow, scraping sound. The wind shifts, coming down from the north again, carrying the sound of the river. The valley creek is freezing over more solidly now. The ice groans and cracks as the temperature drops, a deep, resonant booming sound that echoes through the valley. It sounds like the earth itself is complaining under the weight of the winter. The trees, now thinned, offer less protection from the wind, and it whistles through the new gaps, singing a high, lonely song. The camera of the mind pulls back to a wide shot of the valley. The scene is one of thousands of small fires, now partially obscured by the crude brush huts. The camp looks like a colony of strange, glowing insects nestled in the snow. The smoke hangs in a continuous sheet over the valley, glowing faintly from the fires below. The sky above is entirely black, a void without stars. The visual style is grainy, the paper texture visible through the dark layers of pencil. The sense of isolation is profound. They are an island of faint light in a sea of dark, frozen wilderness. The second night has begun. The men are more sheltered than before, but they are also more tired. The adrenaline of the arrival has faded, replaced by the reality of their situation. They are here. They are stuck here. The winter is just beginning. The work has only just started. The axes rest against the sides of the huts, the metal heads cooling rapidly, turning brittle in the frost. The hands that wielded them are tucked into armpits or wrapped in blankets. The breathing of the camp slows down again, settling into the rhythm of sleep. The snow falls steadily, burying the day's work, smoothing the edges, silencing the world. One by one, the men drift off, falling into the dark, dreamless sleep of the exhausted. The sentries resume their watch, standing like ghosts at the edge of the light, staring into the swirling snow. The cycle continues. The cold presses in. The heart of the army beats slow and low, waiting for the next gray dawn. The light that enters the brush huts is filtered and dim. It passes through the layers of hemlock and cedar boughs, turning the gray morning into a murky, greenish twilight within the shelter. It is a submarine light, thick and diffused, revealing the floating dust motes that dance in the stagnant air. The men wake slowly. The sleep of exhaustion is deep and narcotic, a heavy curtain that is difficult to push aside. When they move, the dried pine needles beneath them rustle, a dry, brittle sound that mimics the whispering of the wind outside. The air inside the hut is warmer than the air outside, but it is a damp, suffocating warmth, heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, wet wool, and the resinous, sticky scent of the evergreens. The sap from the branches has dripped during the night, small amber beads that cling to the blankets and the hair of the sleepers. Crawling out of the hut is a birth into the cold. The transition is violent. One moment the air is still and heavy. The next, the wind strikes the face like a wet towel frozen solid. The men emerge on hands and knees, dragging their blankets behind them, into the flat, gray light of the third day. The snow has stopped falling, but it lies heavy and undisturbed between the shelters, a white ocean that has swallowed the forest floor. The world is a study in texture. The smooth, matte white of the snow, the rough, chaotic brown of the brush huts, and the vertical, striated gray of the tree trunks that remain standing. The order has come down from the headquarters. The army must build a city. It is not to be a haphazard collection of shelters, but a structured arrangement of log cabins. The specifications are precise, dictated by General Washington with the exactitude of a surveyor. Each hut is to be 14 feet by 16 feet. The walls are to be 6.5 feet high. They are to be built of logs, notched at the corners and chinked with clay. 12 men to a hut. It is a geometry of survival, a grid to be imposed upon the wilderness. The soldiers listen to the orders with hollow eyes. The numbers mean labor. 14 feet, 16 feet. These are not just measurements. They are weights. They are hours of chopping. They are miles of dragging. The axes begin again. The sound is the heartbeat of the camp, a rhythmic, percussive thudding that starts in one sector and spreads to the next until the entire valley vibrates with it. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The focus zooms in on the point of impact. The steel head of the axe, cold and gray, strikes the frozen bark of a white oak. The bark shatters, flying off in dark, jagged flakes. Underneath, the wood is pale and yellow, a shocking brightness in the gloomy landscape. The wood is frozen. It does not cut easily. It resists the blade, sending a shockwave up the handle of the axe, into the hands, up the arms, and into the shoulders of the man swinging it. The vibration is constant, a dull ache that settles into the bones. The trees of Pennsylvania are hardwoods: oak, hickory, chestnut, walnut. They are dense, heavy timbers grown strong in the rocky soil. To fell a single tree takes hundreds of swings. The men work in teams, rotating the axe when one man's arms turn to jelly. The one resting stands by, hands tucked into armpits, watching the breath of the axeman pump into the air. The breath comes in short, sharp bursts, synchronized with the swings. Ha, ha, ha. It is a labor of lung and muscle, fueled by almost nothing. The stomachs of the men are empty voids, cramping with hunger. The lack of food makes the head light, the vision swim. The world tilts slightly at the edges of the vision, a dizzying effect that makes the trees seem to sway even when there is no wind. When a tree finally yields, it gives a warning groan, the fibers of the heartwood tearing apart. Then it leans, slowly at first, gaining speed with terrifying momentum, crashing through the branches of its neighbors, hitting the snowy ground with a thunderous boom that shakes the earth. A cloud of snow dust rises, suspending in the air like a phantom. For a moment there is silence. The men stare at the fallen giant. Then the work changes. Now it must be stripped. The smaller axes come out, lopping off the branches, leaving only the main trunk, a long gray cylinder lying in the snow. Now comes the dragging. The horses are few, and those that remain are skeletons wrapped in hide. Their ribs show like the hoops of a barrel. Their heads hang low, their eyes dull and glazed. They cannot pull the heavy logs through the deep snow. They would collapse and die. So the men become the oxen. Ropes are tied around the thick end of the log. The ropes are old, frayed hemp, rough to the touch. The men line up, grabbing the rope or fashioning harnesses from grapevines and leather straps. Heave, the word is a guttural grunt. The men lean forward, their boots slipping in the snow. The log resists. It is an immense dead weight anchored by friction. Heave, they pull again. The log shifts. It breaks free of the ice that has already begun to form beneath it. It slides, plowing a furrow through the snow, scraping against the hidden rocks. The sound is a low, grinding growl, wood against stone, wood against ice. The men strain, their bodies at 45-degree angles to the ground. The rope bites into their shoulders, cutting off circulation, chafing the skin raw through the thin coats. They drag the logs to the designated building sites. The camp is being laid out in streets, parallel lines running along the contours of the hills. The snow in these streets is trampled down into a hard, brown slush, mixed with mud and wood chips. The visual style of the scene captures this grim procession, dark, huddled figures pulling long, dark lines across a white page. The shading is heavy, the strokes of the pencil digging into the paper to convey the weight, the resistance, the sheer physical inertia of the task. At the building sites, the architecture of the log cabin begins. It is a primitive, sturdy architecture. The logs must be notched at the ends so they lock together. A soldier with a sharp axe stands over the log ends. He cuts a V shape or a saddle notch into the wood. Accuracy is required. If the notch is too shallow, the wall will be unstable. If it is too deep, the wall will be too low. He works with slow, deliberate chops. The chips of wood fly out, landing on the boots of the men waiting to lift. The fresh wood smells sharp and clean, an acidic scent of oak tannins. Lifting the logs requires more men. As the walls rise, the lifting becomes harder. The first few courses of logs are easy, rolled into place. But by the time the wall is waist-high, the logs must be lifted, 4 men at each end. Ready, lift, they grunt, hoisting the timber. The bark is rough, tearing at mittens and skin. They maneuver the log into place, dropping it into the notches of the wall below. Thud. The sound is solid and final. The log settles. The wall grows 6 inches higher. The work is slow, painfully slow. The cold makes the fingers clumsy. A hammer is dropped and disappears into the snow, requiring precious minutes of digging to retrieve. A notched log doesn't fit and must be rolled off and recut. The wind whistles through the gaps between the logs. These are not airtight structures. They are cages of timber. The gaps will need to be filled, but for now, the wind blows straight through the rising skeletons of the huts. The ground itself fights them. To clear a flat space for the floor, they must dig through the snow and the frozen crust of the earth. The shovels clang against the ground as if striking iron. Sparks fly. The soil is frozen solid to a depth of several inches. They have to hack at it with pickaxes, breaking it up into frozen clods that look like rocks. The dark earth, once exposed, contrasts sharply with the white surroundings. It is the color of umber and charcoal, dead and hard. As the afternoon progresses, the temperature hovers just above zero. The sky remains a monolithic slab of gray, suppressing all shadows, creating a flat, shadowless light that makes it difficult to judge depth. The men move in a trance of labor. They do not talk of the war. They do not talk of home. They talk of the wood. Too thick. Twist it. Down a bit. The language is reduced to the immediate mechanical necessities. The scope of their world has shrunk to the log in front of them, the rope in their hand, the sensation of their own freezing toes. The hunger is a constant rhythmic pang. It comes in waves, a wave of dizziness, a hollow ache, a weakness in the knees. Then it passes, leaving behind a dull lethargy. Some men chew on birch twigs, tasting the wintergreen flavor of the bark, trying to trick their stomachs. Others gnaw on strips of leather from old cartridge boxes. It is not food, but it is something to chew. The jaw muscles work, the saliva flows, but the stomach remains empty. The visual focus shifts to a single soldier pausing to rest. He leans against the half-built wall of a hut. His coat is a patchwork of different fabrics, stitched together with coarse thread. His hands, wrapped in rags, rest on the rough bark of the oak log. You can see the texture of his skin, chapped, wind-burned, deeply lined with grime. His breath steams in front of his face, coating his eyelashes in frost. He looks at the tree line where the forest is slowly receding, leaving behind a field of stumps. The stumps are raw wounds in the snow, yellow tops cut at jagged angles. They look like tombstones. The sun begins to set, invisible behind the clouds, but its departure is felt by the deepening of the cold and the dimming of the light. The gray world turns blue again. The vintage-colored pencil effect darkens, the artist pressing harder with the indigo and black pencils. The edges of the trees blur. The figures of the men become silhouettes. The sound of the axes begins to taper off. One by one, the teams stop. They cannot work in the dark. It is too dangerous. A misstep with an axe in the twilight could mean a severed foot. And a severed foot in this cold, with no medicine, is a death sentence. The men leave the unfinished huts. The structures stand in the snow like ancient ruins, roofless squares of logs that hold nothing but shadows. They are monuments to unfinished intent. The men trudge back to the brush huts, their bodies bent forward, shoulders slumped. The walk back is silent. The only sound is the crunch of snow underfoot, a crisp, dry sound that seems loud in the gathering dusk. Back at the fires, the evening ritual repeats. The stirring of the coals, the adding of wood, the desperate gathering of warmth. The fires are the only color in the world, bright, wavering oranges and yellows that push back the blue darkness. The smoke hangs low, a ceiling of smog that traps the smells of the camp. The men sit on logs or on their packs, staring into the flames. This is the sleep formula state, a suspension of time, a fixation on the flickering light, a numbness of the mind. Tonight, the ration is slightly better. A wagon has arrived with a barrel of whiskey and some salted fish. The fish is hard and dry, covered in a crust of salt. It must be soaked in water before it can be eaten. The men boil it in their kettles. The smell of the boiling salt fish is pungent and briny, a smell of the sea in the middle of the mountains. The whiskey is watered down, a pale amber liquid that burns the throat and warms the stomach for a fleeting moment. It is distributed with care, 1 gill per man. They drink it slowly, savoring the burn. The night settles in. The wind dies down completely. The air becomes still and crystalline. The temperature plummets. It is colder than the previous nights. The moisture in the breath freezes instantly. The trees pop and crack in the darkness, the sap expanding and splitting the wood. It is a lonely, gunshot sound that echoes through the valley. Inside the brush huts, the men lie down again. The boughs they sleep on are matted down now, offering less cushioning. The ground is harder. The cold seeps up from the earth, through the pine needles, through the blankets, into the flesh. They sleep in their clothes. They sleep in their coats. They sleep in their hats. There is no undressing at Valley Forge. To undress is to freeze. They huddle together, spooning, a mass of shivering humanity. The camera pans over the camp in the dead of night. The skeletons of the log huts stand in rows, silent and empty. They are waiting for the morning. They are waiting for the axes. They are waiting for the mud and the roof and the fire. But for now, they are just boxes of cold air. The snow begins to fall again, very lightly, a fine diamond dust that glitters in the moonlight that manages to pierce the thinning clouds. The flakes land on the raw wood of the fresh-cut logs, covering the yellow oak with a dusting of white. The narrative voice whispers of endurance, of the slow, grinding passage of time, of the patience required to build a city with nothing but hands and axes in the dead of winter. The environment is the main character. The cold is the antagonist. The men are merely the texture, the detail in the landscape. They are persistent, like the moss on the rocks, like the roots of the trees. They do not leave. They do not fade. They stay. Deep in the woods, beyond the ring of sentries, a pack of wolves howls. It is a mournful, sliding sound, rising and falling in the distance. The dogs of the camp do not answer. They are too tired, too cold. The howl hangs in the air, a reminder of the wildness that surrounds them. The valley is a bowl of silence, holding the sleeping army in its frozen hands. The third part of the story ends not with a conclusion, but with a continuation. The night stretches on. The frost thickens. The logs wait. The rhythm of the sleep story is unbroken, a continuous loop of cold, dark, and heavy stillness. The charcoal drawing is complete for this moment, a dark, textured image of unfinished walls and sleeping men under a vast, indifferent sky. The winter solstice arrives not with a celebration of light, but with a deepening of the gray. It is the shortest day of the year, a day where the sun seems to lack the will to climb the sky, skimming low along the southern horizon like a shy ghost before sinking back into the earth. The valley is steeped in a perpetual twilight. The shadows of the trees are long and faint, stretching across the snow-covered ground like the bars of a vast, natural cage. The air has changed quality again. It is no longer just cold. It is thick. The moisture from the river and the breath of thousands of men and horses has saturated the atmosphere, creating a heavy, damp fog that clings to the ground. It is a freezing fog, a mist that turns to ice the moment it touches a solid surface. The visual landscape is a study in soft focus. The sharp lines of the pencil drawings are smudged now, blended with a stump to create the hazy, indistinct atmosphere of the fog. The trees recede into the mist, their tops disappearing into the white void. The unfinished log huts appear as dark, rectangular blocks floating in a sea of milk. The sounds of the camp are dampened further by the heavy air. The ring of the axes is duller, a flat thud rather than a sharp crack. The voices of the men are muffled, as if they are speaking from behind a heavy curtain. Work continues on the city of logs. The walls of the first huts are rising, course by course, log by log. But a wall is not a shelter. A wall is merely a windbreak. To make it a home, it needs a roof, and it needs to be sealed. The focus of the labor shifts now to the details of enclosure. The men turn their attention to the gaps. The logs, rough-hewn and uneven, do not sit perfectly flush against one another. There are spaces between them, cracks wide enough to put a hand through, wide enough to let the winter wind whistle into the room. These gaps must be filled. This is the task of chinking. It is a dirty, wet, freezing task. The materials are simple: clay, water, and whatever binding agent can be found, straw, dry grass, or even small stones. The clay is dug from the banks of the creek or from beneath the snow in the camp. It is a heavy, red-brown clay, dense and sticky. In the summer, it would be pliable, easy to work. In the winter, it is a frozen mass that must be broken apart with pickaxes and warmed before it can be mixed. Watch the process through the lens of the dark artistic style. A group of soldiers stands around a large, shallow pit dug into the ground near a fire. They are mixing the daub. They pour water from the creek into the pit. The water steams as it hits the frozen earth. They stomp the clay with their feet or mash it with heavy wooden clubs. It is a slow, churning motion. The clay resists. It is thick and viscous. It clings to their boots, adding pounds of weight to every step. The color of the clay is a deep, burnt sienna, a warm earth tone that contrasts sharply with the blue-gray of the snow and the iron-gray of the sky. Once the clay is mixed to a paste, it must be applied to the walls. The men work with their bare hands. Gloves would become sodden and heavy, useless for the delicate work of pushing the clay into the cracks. They scoop up handfuls of the wet, freezing mud. They press it into the gaps between the oak logs, squelch. The sound is wet and heavy. They smooth it over, sealing the wood. The cold of the clay transfers instantly to the skin. The hands turn red, then blue, then white. The mud dries on the skin, sucking the moisture out, causing the knuckles to crack and bleed. The blood mixes with the clay, a dark, rusty streak in the brown mortar. They work in a rhythm: scoop, press, smooth, scoop, press, smooth. It is a mindless, repetitive action. The cold travels up the arms, settling in the elbows and shoulders. The men stop frequently to run to the fires, holding their mud-caked hands out to the flames. The clay dries and crusts on their skin, turning into a hard shell. When they flex their fingers, the shell breaks, falling into the fire in dry flakes. They warm their hands just enough to regain feeling, just enough to feel the pain of the cold again, and then they return to the wall. Simultaneously, the roofing begins. This is a challenge of engineering and scarcity. There are no nails. The barrels of nails that should have arrived have not. They are lost somewhere on the road, or stolen, or simply never existed. So the roofs must be built without iron. They must be held together by gravity, friction, and wood. The men must split shingles, or shakes, from the blocks of oak and cedar. The tool for this is the froe, a simple L-shaped blade with a wooden handle. The worker places the blade on the end of a block of wood. He strikes the back of the blade with a heavy wooden mallet. Whack! The blade bites into the grain. He levers the handle, twisting the blade. The wood splits along the grain with a sharp crrrack. It is a satisfying sound, the sound of the tree yielding its structure. The split reveals the clean, pale interior of the wood, smelling of tannins and history. The shingles are rough, uneven slabs of wood. They are passed up to the men standing on the top walls of the huts. These men balance precariously on the slippery logs, their boots searching for purchase on the frost-slicked wood. They lay the shingles in overlapping rows, starting at the eaves and working up to the peak. Because there are no nails to hold them, they use weight poles. Long, slender saplings are laid across the rows of shingles to hold them down. These poles are tied to the structure with vines, or with strips of tough hickory bark, or simply held by the weight of heavy stones placed on top. It is a fragile roof. A strong wind could lift the shingles, a heavy snow could crush them, but it is a covering, it blocks the sky. As the first roofs are completed, the space underneath changes. The light is cut off. The interior becomes a dark, enclosed cave. The wind is stopped. The sound of the world outside is muffled. For the first time in weeks, there is a defined inside and outside. The men stand inside the roofed shell. It is dark. The floor is still frozen mud. The walls are still drying clay, but the air is still. They can light a small fire in the center of the earthen floor, and the heat stays, or at least it lingers longer than it does in the open. But now a new problem arises: smoke. There are no chimneys yet. The smoke rises to the roof, fills the peak, and then descends, filling the room with a thick, acrid cloud. The men cough, their eyes streaming. They have built a shelter, but they have also built a smokehouse. They must cut a hole in the roof or leave a gap in the gable end for the smoke to escape. But the smoke is stubborn. It hangs in the humid air, refusing to rise. It becomes a permanent resident of the hut. The soldiers live in a blue haze. Their clothes, their hair, their skin become saturated with the smell of oak smoke. It is a smell that will never leave them, a smell that permeates the pores. In the drawings, this is depicted by a darkening of the figures, a layering of charcoal over the details of their faces, obscuring their features in shadow and soot. Outside, the snow begins to change. The temperature fluctuates slightly around the freezing point. The snow melts a little during the day, turning into a slushy, granular mess, and then freezes hard at night into a sheet of ice. The camp becomes a skating rink of uneven, treacherous terrain. The ruts in the roads are cast in ice. The footprints of the men are frozen molds. Walking is a hazard. Men slip and fall, the sound of bodies hitting the hard ground echoing through the trees. Thump. A groan. The slow struggle to rise. There is no energy for sudden movements, so the falls are slow, clumsy collapses. Focus returns to the feet. The visual narrative cannot look away from them. The shoes that were falling apart in December are now largely gone. The leather has rotted away or been worn through. Men wrap their feet in fire cakes, the canvas bags used to hold flour, or in pieces of raw hide from the slaughtered cattle. The hide is hard and stiff when dry and slimy when wet. It offers little insulation. The trail of the centuries is marked not just by footprints in the snow, but by the reddish tint of blood. It is a subtle detail in the colored pencil drawing, faint strokes of crimson and rust mixed into the white and blue of the snow. It is not a dramatic gash, but a constant, low-level abrasion. The ice cuts the soles. The cold cracks the heels. The blood seeps out, drop by drop, mapping the movements of the army. Hunger is the other architect of this misery. The commissary is empty. The wagons do not come. The men are living on fire cake and water. Fire cake is a simple, brutal food. Flour and water mixed into a paste and baked on a hot stone or in the ashes of the fire. It tastes of smoke and ash. It is gritty. It lies in the stomach like a stone, digesting slowly, providing just enough caloric energy to keep the heart beating but not enough to warm the body. The men dream of meat. They dream of bread. They dream of vegetables. But their waking reality is the gray paste and the black kettle. Occasionally, a small ration of beef arrives, but the cattle that are driven to the camp are as starving as the men. They are skeletal creatures, having eaten nothing but brush on the long drive. When they are slaughtered, there is little meat on the bones. The meat is tough, stringy, and devoid of fat. The men boil it for hours, trying to extract some nourishment, making a thin, watery broth that tastes faintly of iron. They crack the bones to get the marrow, the only source of fat available. The days blend together. There is no Sunday, no Monday. There is only the light and the dark, the waking and the sleeping, the chopping and the resting. The construction of the city moves at a glacial pace. By Christmas, only a few huts are fully covered. Most are still open boxes or half-raised walls. The officers have issued orders that no one is to move into a hut until it is finished, to ensure the work continues. But the cold is a persuasive, disobeying force. Men sneak into the roofed huts, huddled in the corners, preferring the smoky darkness to the clear, freezing wind. The wind is a character in its own right. It has a voice. It whistles through the chinking that hasn't dried yet. It moans through the eaves of the roofs. It roars through the treetops of the surrounding forest. It is a constant physical pressure. It searches for weakness. It finds the gap in the collar, the hole in the boot, the tear in the blanket. It sucks the heat away from the body with a greedy efficiency. The men learn to stand with their backs to it, to build their fires in the lee of the wind, to sleep curled in tight balls to minimize their surface area. As twilight falls on another day, the visual scene shifts to the interior of a partially finished hut. The walls are up, the roof is on, but the door is just an open rectangle covered by a hanging blanket. Inside, a single candle burns, a luxury, perhaps melted down from animal fat or saved from better times. The light is weak, casting long, wavering shadows against the rough logs. 12 men are crammed into the space. There are no bunks yet. They sleep on the mud floor, on piles of straw that have been crushed into dust. The atmosphere in the hut is intimate and oppressive. The smell of 12 unwashed bodies, of damp wool, of old leather, of sickness is thick, but it is shared. There is a camaraderie in the misery. They speak in low voices, murmuring about the work, about the rumors of food, about the weather. Wind's turning. More snow. My hands are cracked open. Put some grease on 'em. Ain't got no grease, ate it. A dry, wheezing laugh follows. It is a humor stripped of all joy, reduced to a dry husk of irony. The camera pans out through the blanket door, back into the night. The camp is a patchwork of progress. Some huts are dark, finished shapes. Others are jagged ruins of walls. Some are just cleared squares of snow. The fires outside are fewer now, as more men move under cover, but the smoke still rises in a collective column, blotting out the stars. The moon is a dim bulb behind the clouds, offering a diffused, pearlescent glow that illuminates the snow but casts no shadows. The sounds of the night take over. The coughing is constant. It is the soundtrack of the encampment, a chorus of dry, hacking coughs that echoes from hut to hut. It is the sound of lungs irritated by smoke and cold, the sound of the camp fever beginning to take hold. The cold air carries the sound with crystal clarity. Somewhere, a tree falls in the forest, not from an axe but from the weight of the ice in its branches. It crashes down, a sudden, violent noise that makes the sentries jump, their nerves frayed by the silence. The texture of the scene is dominated by the rough and the smooth. The rough bark of the logs, the rough wool of the coats, the rough, frozen ground, contrasted with the smooth, white expanse of the snow, the smooth, cold metal of the musket barrels, the smooth, glassy surface of the frozen creek. The artist's hand uses the side of the pencil to create the broad, smooth textures of the snow, and the sharp point to etch the intricate, chaotic lines of the brush and the wood grain. The cold deepens as the night progresses. The thermometer, if there were one, would show the temperature dropping well below freezing. The chinking clay that was applied during the day freezes hard. If it was too wet, it cracks and falls out, leaving the gap open again. The work of the day is undone by the cold of the night. The men will wake up to find the wind blowing through the holes they spent hours filling. It is a Sisyphean task. Roll the rock up the hill, watch it roll down. Fill the crack with mud, watch it freeze and fall. But they do not stop. The narrative emphasizes this relentless persistence. There is no alternative. To stop is to die. So they endure the freezing night, waiting for the gray light to return so they can mix the mud again, split the wood again, drag the logs again. The cycle is a loop of sensation. The bite of the wind, the ache of the muscle, the gnawing of the stomach, the heaviness of the eyes. The fourth part of the story draws to a close not with a climax, but with a deepening of the state of being. The camp is becoming a city, but it is a city of ghosts, a city of silence, a city of slow, frozen motion. The environment is winning. The men are merely holding their ground, digging their heels into the frozen mud, refusing to be swept away by the winter. The snow begins to fall again, filling the footprints, covering the wood chips, softening the hard edges of the new-built walls. The world turns white and gray once more. The year turns. The calendar, if one could be found among the frozen possessions of the encampment, would read January. But here, time is not marked by the turning of a page or the chiming of a clock. It is marked by the deepening of the snow and the thickening of the ice on the river. The valley has been transformed. The chaotic, organic sprawl of the forest has been replaced by the rigid, geometric lines of the camp. The trees are gone, their stumps buried under drifts of white. In their place stand the huts. Row upon row of log cabins, dark and box-like, etched against the white hillsides. They sit in parallel lines, forming streets that are not streets, but avenues of frozen mud and trampled snow. The city has risen, a city of timber and clay, built by hands that are numb and bellies that are empty. The visual landscape is one of stark, repetitive patterns. The vintage-colored pencil style emphasizes this repetition. Dark rectangle, white space. Dark rectangle, white space. The perspective lines vanish into the gray mist of the horizon. There is a heaviness to the drawing, the artist pressing down hard to create the dense, solid blacks of the log walls, contrasting with the soft, smudged whites of the snowdrifts that pile up against them. The wind, no longer broken by the trees, sweeps down the streets with a new ferocity, carving the snow into sharp, wave-like ridges, sculpting the drifts into smooth, aerodynamic shapes that curl around the corners of the huts. The exterior of the camp is quiet. It is a deceptively peaceful scene. The smoke rises from hundreds of chimneys, some made of wood lined with clay, some merely holes in the roof, creating a permanent, low-hanging cloud that blankets the valley. It is a gray ceiling, a lid placed over the bowl of the hills. Underneath this lid, the air is still and acrid. The smell is a physical presence. It is the smell of green wood burning, of wet soot, of unwashed wool, and of the latrines that have been dug on the outskirts. But primarily, it is the smell of cold, a sharp, metallic scent that stings the nostrils and coats the back of the throat with a taste like iron. Move closer to one of the huts. The door is a rough assembly of split planks hung on leather hinges that creak in the wind. Or perhaps it is just a heavy blanket, stiff with frost, nailed to the lintel. There are no windows. The only light comes from the door if it is open or from the fire inside. To enter is to step into a cave. The transition from the bright, flat glare of the snow to the dark, smoky interior is blinding. The eyes take minutes to adjust. Inside, the world is sepia and gray. The walls are rough logs, their bark peeling in places to reveal the smooth wood underneath. The chinking, the clay and straw mixture stuffed between the logs, is drying and cracking. In some places it has fallen out, leaving jagged holes where the daylight pierces through like a laser beam, illuminating the swirling smoke. The floor is earth. It was mud once, churned by boots during construction, but now it is frozen into a topographical map of ridges and valleys, hard as concrete. There is no furniture, no tables, no chairs. The men live on the floor. Along the walls they have built bunks, which are merely raised platforms of logs or rough planks lifted a foot or so off the frozen ground. On these platforms they have piled straw. The straw was fresh once, golden and dry. Now it is matted, broken, and damp. It holds the moisture of the air and the sweat of the sleepers. It smells of mold and earth. This is the bed. This is the chair. This is the table. The men sit on the straw, their knees pulled to their chests, wrapped in their blankets. The blankets are thin. They are the standard issue, or what remains of it, coarse gray wool that scratches the skin. They are stained with mud and soot. Many are torn, the holes patched with whatever fabric could be found or simply tied together with twine. The men share them. Conservation of heat is the only law that matters. 2 or 3 men will huddle together under a single covering, their bodies forming a tangled knot of limbs. They sleep in shifts, not by design but by the necessity of the fire. The fire is the heart of the hut. It burns on a hearth of flat stones near the back wall or in the center of the room if the chimney is above. It is a small fire. Wood is precious. Even though they are surrounded by a forest, the effort to cut and drag the wood is immense for men who have eaten nothing but flour paste for weeks. So they burn the wood slowly. They feed the fire stick by stick. They watch the flames with a hypnotic intensity. The firelight paints their faces in shades of orange and deep umber, highlighting the hollows of their cheeks, the sharpness of their cheekbones, the dark circles under their eyes. This is the army of the skeleton. The hunger has sculpted them. The fat is gone, consumed by the body to keep the core warm. The muscles have shrunk. The uniforms, already ill-fitting, now hang loosely on their frames. A coat that was once tight across the shoulders now drapes like a cloak. The breeches gather in folds around the waist, held up by belts tightened to the last hole, and then tightened further with new holes punched by knife points. The focus zooms in on the texture of the clothing. It is a landscape of wear and tear. The elbows are threadbare, the weave of the wool visible and fraying. The hems are ragged, dragging in the mud. Buttons are missing, replaced by wooden toggles or bits of bone. And then there is the lack, the terrible absence of clothing. In this hut there are 12 men, but there are not 12 coats. There are not 12 pairs of shoes. There are not 12 blankets. Detailed observation. In the corner, a soldier prepares to go on guard duty. He stands up, shivering violently as he leaves the warmth of the straw. He is wearing a linen shirt, thin and stained, and breeches that end at the knee. His legs are bare, the skin purple and mottled with the cold. He has no shoes. His feet are wrapped in rags, strips of an old blanket wound round and round, tied at the ankle. He looks at his messmate, who is sitting by the fire wrapped in a heavy blue coat. Wordlessly, the man by the fire stands up. He unbuttons the coat. The brass buttons are cold to the touch. He shrugs the coat off. Underneath, he wears only a thin waistcoat and a shirt. The heat of the coat leaves him instantly, replaced by the damp chill of the room. He hands the coat to the man who is standing. The standing man puts it on. It retains the body heat of its previous owner. It is a temporary gift of warmth. He buttons it to the chin. He takes the musket that was leaning against the wall. He nods once. He turns and pushes aside the blanket door, disappearing into the white void outside. The man who gave up the coat sits back down. He pulls a thin blanket around his shoulders. He moves closer to the fire. He will not move from this spot until his messmate returns. He cannot. To move away from the fire without a coat is to invite death. He is a prisoner of the hut, a prisoner of the lack of wool. This is the reality of the naked regiments. Men who cannot leave their huts because they literally have nothing to wear. They sit in the gloom, waiting for a coat to return, waiting for the sun to set, waiting for the war to end. The atmosphere in the hut is heavy with a somber stillness. There is little talk. Energy is a currency that cannot be spent on words. When they do speak, the voices are low, raspy, scratching against the silence. Wood's low. Is the wagon coming? No, tomorrow maybe. Maybe. The conversation dies as quickly as it began, swallowed by the smoke and the apathy of starvation. The hunger is not a sharp pang anymore. It has settled into a dull, rhythmic nausea, a feeling of lightness in the head, a slowness in the thoughts. The body is shutting down non-essential functions. The men move in slow motion. Reaching for a cup of water takes a deliberate effort of will. Chewing the hard fire cake takes minutes. The jaw muscles tire. The saliva is thick. The taste is of nothing, just starch and ash. Sometimes they boil water and drink it hot. They call it soup, though there is nothing in it but perhaps a few pine needles for vitamin C, or a piece of rock salt if they have it. The hot water fills the stomach, tricking it for a moment. It provides a fleeting sensation of fullness, a ghostly warmth that radiates from the center of the chest before fading. The steam from the cups rises into the smoky air, mingling with the breath of the men. Outside, the wind shifts. It begins to howl around the corners of the cabin. It finds the gaps in the chinking that were missed, or the places where the clay has fallen out. A draft of freezing air shoots into the room like a spear. It cuts through the smoke, clearing a path of cold visibility. The men shift their positions, turning their backs to the draft, pulling the blankets tighter. One man gets up slowly and grabs a handful of straw. He jams it into the crack in the logs. It stems the flow but does not stop it. The wind hisses through the straw, a sibilant whisper that speaks of the infinite cold outside. The vintage-colored pencil aesthetic renders this scene in deep, shadowy tones. The interior of the hut is drawn in heavy strokes of burnt umber, dark gray, and black. The light from the fire is a soft, smudged area of yellow ochre and cadmium orange, but it does not reach the corners. The corners are lost in darkness. The figures of the men are indistinct, merging with the shadows, their forms defined only by the highlights on a nose, a cheekbone, a knee. The smoke is drawn with the side of a white pencil, a translucent haze that overlays everything, softening the edges, making the scene feel dreamlike and suffocating. The day passes without event. There are no drills today. The weather is too severe, the men too weak. The grand parade, the open field in the center of the camp, is a desert of wind-scoured snow. No flags fly, no drums beat. The army is in hibernation. The only movement is the smoke and the occasional figure trudging from a hut to the latrine and back, head down, fighting the wind. Inside the hut, a soldier takes out a piece of charcoal from the fire. He finds a smooth section on the inside of a log. He begins to draw, not a picture but a line, a mark. He adds it to a row of other marks. He is counting the days. The marks are black and jagged against the pale wood. He stares at them for a long time. The passage of time is visible there in charcoal. Each mark is a day of cold. Each mark is a day of hunger. The line of marks is getting long. He drops the charcoal back into the fire. It flares up for a second, then turns to ash. As evening approaches, the light in the hut changes. The daylight at the door fades, turning from a bright white rectangle to a dull gray, then to a deep blue. The fire becomes the sole source of illumination. The shadows lengthen and dance on the walls. The logs seem to close in. The hut feels smaller at night. The ceiling of smoke descends lower. The routine of the night begins. The men prepare for sleep. There is little preparation to be done. They do not undress. They merely rearrange the straw, fluffing it up to create a pocket of air. They check their feet. They loosen the rags to allow blood to flow or tighten them to keep the warmth in. They massage their toes, looking for the white patches of frostbite. If they find one, they rub it with snow or hold it near, but not too near the fire. The sensation of returning blood is a burning agony, a sign of life. The man who went out on guard duty returns. The door pushes open, letting in a swirl of snow and a blast of air that makes the fire flicker wildly. He stumbles in, his movements stiff and jerky. He is covered in a layer of frost. His eyebrows are white. The scarf around his mouth is a solid block of ice from his frozen breath. He stands by the fire, shaking. He cannot speak yet. His jaw is frozen shut. The messmate who gave him the coat stands up. He helps the guard undo the buttons. The fingers of the guard are useless, curled into frozen claws. The coat is unbuttoned. It is heavy with cold. The guard peels it off. The warmth of the coat is gone. It has been sucked out by the night. The owner takes it back, putting it on over his shivering body. He feels the cold of the snow that has melted into the wool. It is a wet, heavy cold, but it is his coat. He wraps it around himself. The guard sinks down onto the straw. He holds his hands to the fire. He begins to thaw. The pain hits him. He groans, a low, guttural sound. "God," he whispers, "it's cold." It is a statement of fact devoid of emotion. It is simply the truth. The meal for the evening is prepared. It is the same. Fire cake, maybe a little thinner today. The flour barrel is getting low. The men watch the mixing of the flour and water with intense scrutiny. Every grain of flour is counted. No one speaks. The only sound is the slap-slap of the dough being patted into cakes between hands. They are placed on the hot stones. They hiss. The smell of burnt flour fills the hut. It is not a distinct smell, but it triggers the salivary glands. They eat, they chew slowly. The fire cake is gritty, it wears down the teeth. It is swallowed, it sits in the stomach, it is over. The night settles in. The wind outside seems to pick up speed. It batters the hut, shaking the heavy logs. The roof creaks. The shingles rattle. It sounds like a giant hand trying to crush the small wooden box. But the box holds. The structure is sound. The men are safe from the wind, if not the cold. They lie down. The formation is tight. They spoon together, back to belly. The man on the outside of the group has the coldest spot. He will rotate to the middle later in the night. It is a silent agreement, a choreography of sleep. The blankets are pulled up over heads. The breathing synchronizes. 12 chests rising and falling in the gloom. The fire burns down. It becomes a bed of coals glowing like a dragon's eye in the dark. The heat diminishes. The cold creeps back from the corners. It rises from the frozen ground, seeping through the straw. It touches the hips and shoulders of the sleeping men. They shiver in their sleep, a collective vibration. On the walls, the moisture from their breath begins to freeze. It forms delicate, fern-like patterns of frost on the inside of the logs. The hut is being lined with ice. The city is freezing from the inside out. The visual detail is microscopic. The tiny, sharp crystals of ice growing on the rough bark, glittering faintly in the dying light of the embers. The camera of the mind pulls back, floating up through the smoke hole, up through the roof, back into the night sky. The camp is dark now. The fires are low. The smoke still rises, a forest of gray pillars supporting the clouds. The wind rushes over the valley, unimpeded, carrying the snow from the open fields and depositing it in the streets of the log city. The snow buries the discarded bones, the broken tools, the frozen droppings of the horses. It purifies the scene, turning the misery into a smooth, white abstraction. The silence is vast. It is the silence of a held breath. The army is suspended in the amber of the winter. They are not moving forward, they are not retreating, they are simply existing. Step, drag, sleep, wake, chop, shiver. The loop continues. The middle of the winter is a boundless plain of time stretching out in all directions, white and gray and cold. The narrative voice slows to a whisper. The heavy, hypnotic tone emphasizes the weight of the logs, the weight of the snow, the weight of the eyelids. The story is not going anywhere. It is staying here in the hut, in the straw, in the cold. It is a story of endurance where the only victory is waking up the next morning. The frost thickens on the interior walls. The coals dim to a dull red. The wind sings its high, lonely song in the eaves. The fifth part of the history settles into the drifts, burying itself alongside the soldiers, waiting for the long night to pass. February arrives. It does not come with a fanfare of changing winds or a shift in the light. It arrives simply as a continuation of the gray, a deepening of the trench that the winter has dug through the timeline of the year. The calendar has turned, but the landscape remains locked in the same frozen paralysis. If anything, the grip of the cold has tightened. The snow that fell in December and January has not melted. It has merely been compressed, layer upon layer, into a geological stratum of ice and hard-packed powder. It covers the valley floor to a depth that makes walking a slow, high-stepping agony. The paths between the huts are now canyons carved through the drifts, narrow corridors of white walls that rise to the knees, sometimes to the waist. The visual palette of the colored pencil drawing shifts slightly. The heavy, dark charcoals of the deep winter nights are now contrasted with the blinding, flat white of the February days. The sun, when it appears, is a distant, glaring eye. It reflects off the snow with a brilliance that seeps into the brain, causing a dull ache behind the eyes. The glare is relentless. It offers no heat, only a harsh, interrogating light that reveals every imperfection in the camp. It illuminates the soot stains on the snow, the pile of refuse, the ragged condition of the uniforms. It is a light that exposes the emptiness. And emptiness is the defining quality of this month. The camp is a hollow shell. The woods are empty of game. The squirrels and rabbits have long since been hunted down or have fled to deeper, safer forests. The air is empty of birdsong. The crows and the hawks are silent, circling high above in the thermal currents, watching the stillness below. But most of all, the wagons are empty. The roads leading to Valley Forge are choked with snow. They are impassable. The supply wagons, the lifeline of the army, are stuck miles away, their wheels buried in drifts, their drivers huddled in farmhouses waiting for a thaw that does not come. The commissary department is a ghost town. The barrels of flour are gone. The barrels of salted pork are gone. The shelves are bare wood, dusted with the memory of grain. The great hunger has settled upon the encampment. Focus on the texture of hunger. It is not merely a sensation in the stomach. It is a texture that pervades the entire body. It feels like a hollowing out of the bones. The marrow seems to retract. The skin becomes thin and papery, stretching tight over the cheekbones and the jaw. The eyes sink deeper into the sockets, dark pools in a landscape of pale skin. In the vintage colored pencil style, The faces of the men are drawn with sharp, angular lines. The shading around the eyes is deep indigo. The lips are pale, almost the color of the paper itself. There is a translucence to them, as if they are fading away, becoming less solid, less anchored to the earth. The daily ration, which was once meager, has now vanished. For days at a time there is nothing, no meat, no bread. The chant moves through the camp, a low, murmuring mantra. It is not a shout of rebellion, but a statement of fact. It is a weather report. The men sit in their huts, staring at the fire. To move is to burn calories. To burn calories is to die faster. So they sit. The stillness is profound. The only movement is the shivering, which is the body's involuntary attempt to generate heat, a burning of the last reserves of fuel. The soldiers become foragers of the desperate kind. They look at the world not as a landscape, but as a menu of impossible choices. They look at the birch trees. Can the bark be eaten? They strip the bark, boiling it in the black iron kettles. The water turns a dark, tannic brown. It tastes of wood and bitterness. It offers no nourishment, but the warm liquid fills the void for an hour. They look at the leather of their equipment, the cartridge boxes, the straps of the muskets, the remnants of shoes. Zoom in on a specific detail, a soldier holding a piece of tough, old leather. It is a strap from a broken harness. He cuts it into small squares with his knife. The knife is dull, it saws through the leather slowly. He drops the squares into the boiling water. The leather does not dissolve, it swells slightly, turning gray and slimy. The smell is of wet animal hide, a pungent, earthy scent. He fishes a piece out with a wooden spoon. He puts it in his mouth, he chews. It is like chewing rubber. It resists the teeth. He chews for minutes, for an hour, his jaw working rhythmically. The act of chewing tricks the brain. It says, "We are eating." But the stomach knows. The leather is swallowed, a lump of indigestible matter that sits heavy in the gut. The famine brings a strange silence to the social life of the camp. There are no stories told around the fire. There is no gambling. The energy required for laughter or argument is gone. The men exist in a state of semi-torpor. They sleep for 12, 14 hours a day. It is a hibernation. In their sleep, they dream of food. Vibrant, technicolor dreams of roasted meats, of steaming puddings, of tables laden with fruit. The dreams are so real that waking up is a physical shock, a violent return to the gray, smoky reality of the hut. Outside, the horses are dying. The animals, too, are starving. There is no hay, there is no grain. The horses stand in the makeshift corrals, their heads hanging to their knees. They strip the bark from the trees within reach. They gnaw on the wooden rails of the fences. Their coats are matted and dull. One by one, their legs give out. They sink down into the snow. They do not struggle. They simply fold up like collapsing tents. The snow begins to cover them almost immediately. The visual landscape of the camp is dotted with these mounds, white humps in the snow that mark where a horse has fallen. The men are too weak to bury them. They are too frozen to dig graves. The cold acts as a preservative. The bodies freeze solid, becoming part of the geography. The colored pencil artist renders these shapes with soft, curved strokes of white and light gray, blending them into the drifts. They are quiet monuments to the suffering of the silent beasts. General Washington, in his headquarters at the Isaac Potts House, is a figure of constrained anxiety. The house is a small stone building near the river, sturdy and warm compared to the huts, but the atmosphere inside is heavy. The general sits at his desk. The light from the window falls on his hands, which are holding a quill. The ink in the inkwell has a crust of ice on it. He has to dip the pen and break the crust. Scritch. Scratch. The sound of the pen on the parchment is loud in the quiet room. He is writing to Congress. He is writing to the governors, starving, naked, dissolution. The words are elegant, the handwriting impeccable, but the message is a scream. He looks out the window. He sees the smoke rising from the valley. He sees the stillness. He knows that if the British were to march out from Philadelphia now, there would be no battle. There would be no resistance. His army could not stand up. They could not lift their muskets. They are a ghost army, held together only by the geometry of the camp and the sheer stubbornness of the human will. He dips the pen again. The drop of ink falls, black as night, onto the paper. Back in the huts, the men have developed a new relationship with the fire. It is their god. It is their only source of comfort. They stare into the embers, seeing shapes. They see the faces of their wives. They see the fields of their homes. The firelight creates a trance state. The sleep formula is heavy here. The flickering of the yellow light against the dark logs is a metronome. Flicker, dim, flicker, dim. It regulates the breathing. It slows the heart. The sensation of cold is different when the stomach is empty. It is sharper. It feels like thin needles piercing the skin. The body has no insulation. The blood cools rapidly as it travels to the extremities. Frostbite becomes a plague. The toes turn black. The tips of the ears turn white and hard. The men check each other. "Your nose," one might whisper, pointing a trembling finger. The other man rubs snow on his nose, trying to bring the blood back. The pain of the thaw is the only feeling left. The soundscape of Part 6 is dominated by the wind and the ice. The river, the Schuylkill, is a solid sheet of white. It is frozen so thick that wagons could cross it if there were wagons. The ice makes noises. It booms. It cracks. C-R-R-R-R-R-A-C-K. A sound like a cannon shot that echoes off the hills. It is the river groaning under the pressure of its own solidification. Under the ice, the water still flows, dark and secret, moving towards the sea. But on the surface, everything is static. The men begin to boil their shoes. This is not a metaphor. Those who still have remnants of footwear, old moccasins, or cracked leather shoes, look at them with predatory eyes. If they are not walking, do they need shoes? Can they eat the shoes and wrap their feet in blankets? Some make the choice. The shoes go into the pot. The water turns black with dirt and grease. They drink the broth. It tastes of the road. It tastes of miles of mud and misery, but it is warm. The flying hospital, a misnomer, for it is neither flying nor much of a hospital, is a place of dread. It is a large hut or a collection of huts set apart. The smell there is different. It is the smell of sickness, typhus, dysentery, the camp fever. The men lie in rows on the floor. There is no medicine. There are no bandages. There is only water and the occasional blanket. The doctors move among them, helpless ghosts in greatcoats. They can do nothing but watch. The visual scene in the hospital is dark, almost monochromatic. The shadows are deep and heavy. The figures are vague shapes. The silence is broken only by the rasping breath of the dying. But even here, in the depths of the famine, there is a strange, resilient order. The sentries are still posted. They stand their watch. They are relieved on time. The passwords are given. Victory, liberty, virtue. The words hang in the frozen air, abstract concepts that seem million miles away from the reality of the leather soup and the frozen feet. Yet they say them. They hold the line. The discipline of the drill, practiced in the autumn, holds the structure together even as the biological material crumbles. The sun begins to set on a typical February day. The glare fades. The snow turns blue. The shadows stretch out, long and distorted, reaching from the huts across the valleys. The smoke turns a deep violet against the darkening sky. The cold descends with a physical weight. It presses down on the roofs of the cabins. It presses down on the shoulders of the sentries. In one hut, a soldier finds a single dried corn kernel in the corner of his pocket. It must have been there for months. He holds it up to the firelight. It is a tiny yellow jewel. He looks at it with wonder. He places it on the tip of his tongue. He does not bite it. He lets it sit there, dissolving slowly, savoring the starch. It is a moment of pure, focused sensory experience. The rough texture of the seed coat, the faint, sweet taste of the corn. It is the best meal he has had in weeks. The night brings the wolves closer. They are emboldened by the silence of the camp. They come to the edge of the woods. Their eyes reflect the firelight of the sentry posts. They smell the death. They smell the horses. Their howls are woven into the wind, a high, lonesome harmony that speaks of the wildness of the continent. The soldiers in the huts hear them. They do not fear the wolves. The wolves are just another part of the winter, another hungry mouth in the valley. The moon rises. It is a hunger moon, full and bright and cold. It illuminates the valley with a spectral light. The camp looks like a graveyard of square tombs. The smoke rises straight up, undisturbed by the wind which has momentarily died down. The scene is perfectly still. It is a painting of a paused world. The narrative camera drifts over the roofs. It looks down into the chimneys. It sees the small circles of embers. It sees the huddled forms. It sees the patience. This is the core of the story, the waiting. The active war is paused. The fighting is suspended. The enemy is not the British. The enemy is the caloric deficit. The enemy is the freezing point of water. The narrator's voice is slow, steady, unhurried. It describes the frost forming on the nail of a door hinge. It describes the pattern of the wood grain in a log. It describes the way the snow sparkles like diamond dust under the moonlight. It finds beauty in the desolation. The vintage-colored pencil style renders the frost with delicate, white cross-hatching, creating a texture that you can almost feel with your fingertips. As the night deepens, the temperature drops to its lowest point. The trees in the forest crack again. The sound is like a rifle shot, but no one flinches. It is just the trees. The sap is freezing. The wood is splitting. The earth is tightening its grip. The men sleep. Their breathing is shallow. Their hearts beat slowly, conserving energy. They are in a state of metabolic suspension. They are enduring the unendurable. They are the army without shoes, the army without bread, the army without meat. And yet they are still the army. They have not dissolved. They have not walked away. They are there under the snow, under the moon, under the weight of the history they are blindly writing. The sixth part of the history fades not to black, but to a deep, cold blue. The image is of the frozen river, the white hills, and the dark, silent grid of the city of logs. The story hangs there, suspended in the ice, waiting for the slow, inevitable turn of the earth towards the spring that feels like it will never come. The wheel of the year turns slowly, grinding against the frozen axle of the winter. It is late February now, merging imperceptibly into the early days of March. The change is not marked by warmth, but by light. The sun, previously a shy and distant ghost, begins to assert a geometric presence in the sky. It rises earlier. It sets later. Its arc is higher, cutting a sharper angle through the gray clouds. The light that falls upon the Valley Forge encampment changes texture. It is no longer the flat, shadowless diffusion of deep winter. It is a piercing, granular light that carries the weight of the coming equinox. It strikes the snow with a blinding intensity, reflecting off the millions of ice crystals until the valley floor shines like a sheet of hammered silver. In the vintage-colored pencil aesthetic, this shift is rendered by the introduction of white gouache highlights and sharper, harder lines. The softness of the snowdrifts is replaced by the jagged, crystalline edges of the thaw. For the thaw has begun, but it is a cruel and deceptive thaw. It is not a release. It is a cycle. During the day, the sun melts the surface of the snow and the top inch of the iron-hard earth. The world turns to water and slush. During the night, the temperature plummets back into the depths of the freeze, turning the water to ice and the mud to stone. The valley breathes in a rhythm of liquefaction and solidification. The ground becomes the primary antagonist. The smooth, white pathways of January are gone. In their place is the mud. It is a deep, viscous substance, a chaotic mixture of clay, melted snow, ash, and waste. It varies in color from a pale, sickly ochre to a deep, bruised purple-brown. In the morning, it is a landscape of frozen ruts, sharp as knives that twist the ankles and cut the feet. In the afternoon, it is a quagmire that sucks at the boots for those who have boots and coats the legs of the barefoot men in a cold, heavy plaster. The sound of the camp changes. The crisp crunch of dry snow is replaced by the wet, sucking sound of steps taken in deep mud. Squelch, pop, squelch, pop. It is a wet, labored sound, the sound of an army trying to pull itself out of the earth. Into this landscape of mud and misery comes a new figure. He arrives not with a thunderclap, but with the steady, rhythmic gait of a professional soldier. Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben. He is a shape against the gray sky, drawn in heavy, confident strokes of charcoal and indigo. He wears a large cloak that billows in the wind, and on his chest, a large, glittering star that catches the sunlight. He is a man of geometry, a man of lines and angles come to impose order upon the organic chaos of the camp. He does not speak the language of the men. He speaks the language of the drill. The grand parade, the open field in the center of the encampment, becomes the stage for this new ritual. Before, it was a snowy wasteland. Now it is a classroom of mud. A select group of men, the model company, is gathered. They are a motley collection, a patchwork quilt of uniforms. Some wear hunting shirts of linen stained the color of butternut. Others wear the remnants of regimental coats, blue turned to gray by grime. Many are shirtless under their blankets. Most are shoeless. They stand in the mud, shivering, their eyes fixed on the large man in the center. The drill begins. It is a slow, repetitive process. It is boring. It is hypnotic. It is the imposition of a mechanical rhythm onto the human body. The Baron does not yell in anger, he yells in cadence. He barks commands in a mix of German and French, which are then translated by aides and then repeated by the captains. Attention! The men shuffle. They try to stand straight. Their spines, curved by months of huddling in low huts, resist the vertical line. Shoulder, firelock. The muskets move. They are heavy, 11 pounds of wood and iron. The metal is cold, sucking the heat from the hands. The movement is ragged. One man lifts his musket high, another lifts it low. The line ripples like a snake. The Baron stops them. He walks down the line. His boots are polished, or were before the mud took them. He adjusts a soldier's arm. He moves a foot. He tilts a chin. He treats the men not as flesh and blood, but as statues to be arranged. He is sculpting an army out of clay. The visual detail zooms in on his hands, gloved, large, manipulating the rusted lock of a musket, showing the soldier how to hold his thumb. The contact is firm, impersonal, precise. The drill resumes. It is broken down into tempos. Every motion is numbered. Poise, firelock, 1, 2. The hands move, clack, clack. The sound of hundreds of hands slapping the wood stocks of the muskets echoes off the surrounding hills. It is a dry, percussive sound like the breaking of dry branches. Cock, firelock, 1, 2. The thumbs pull back the hammers, click. The sound is sharper, metallic, a synchronized insect click. Take, aim, the barrels level. They point at the empty woods. The eyes of the men sight down the iron tubes. For a moment they are perfectly still. The breath is held. The steam from their mouth stops rising. This is the new rhythm of the camp. It replaces the rhythm of the axe. The chopping continues, for wood is still needed, but the soul of the camp has moved to the parade ground. The drill is relentless. It starts in the morning as soon as the sun softens the mud. It continues until the light fails. The men of the model company learn the steps. Then they are sent back to their brigades to teach others. The knowledge spreads like a virus. The geometry expands. The focus shifts to the feet of the men during the drill. They are standing in the freezing slush. The sensation of the cold is constant, a dull ache that travels up the shin bones, but they cannot move to warm themselves. They must stand at the attention. They must override the body's natural urge to shiver, to stomp, to curl up. They must remain rigid. This is a new kind of endurance. It is not the passive endurance of the hut, waiting for the night to end. It is the active endurance of the will, forcing the muscles to obey despite the pain. The soundscape of Part 7 is dominated by the voice of the drill and the tramp of the feet. Left, left, left. The cadence is slow, distinct. The men learn to step in unison. They learn to gauge the distance to the man on their right and the man on their left. They are becoming a single organism. When they turn as a block. The visual effect is one of a large, dark shape rotating in the white and brown landscape. The artist renders this with broad, sweeping strokes of the pencil, blurring the individual figures into a single mass of dark blue and brown. The air is filled with the smell of black powder. Even though they are often drilling without ammunition, the residue of the powder remains in the pans of the muskets, a sulfurous, rotten egg smell that mixes with the mud and the smoke. Occasionally, they practice firing with blank cartridges. The command is given, "Fire!" A ragged volley erupts. Puffs of white smoke bloom from the muzzles, instantly whipped away by the March wind. The sound is flat and popping, not the thunder of battle, but the practice of it. The smoke stings the eyes. It coats the faces in a fine gray dust, making the men look even more like specters. The hunger remains. The drill does not fill the stomach. In fact, it sharpens the appetite. The caloric expenditure of marching and handling the heavy muskets leaves the men dizzy. They march with a lightness in the head, a floating sensation. Sometimes a man simply collapses in the formation. He folds up and drops into the mud. The line does not stop. The sergeants bark. Close up, close up. The gap is filled. The man is dragged away to the side to lie in the snow until he recovers or is carried to the hospital. The machine continues. The gears must turn. The sun climbs higher at noon. The mud is at its worst. It is a soup. The men are splattered to the waist. The uniforms are caked in it. When it dries, it turns to a light gray crust that flakes off with every movement. The blue book, the regulations that Steuben is writing night after night, is being inscribed not on paper but on the bodies of the men. The discipline is physical. It is the muscle memory of the load, the ram, the fire. It is the alignment of the shoulder. It is the angle of the foot. In the evenings, the men return to their huts. They are different now. They are exhausted, but it is a different kind of exhaustion. It is the exhaustion of work, not just of suffering. There is a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the morale. They are doing something. They are not just dying, they are becoming professional. They sit by the fires, scraping the mud from their legs with chips of wood. They talk of the drill. They mimic the Baron's accent. That is dis. Dis is not a line. Dis is a noodle, a laugh. A dry, rasping laugh. It is a small sound, but it is there. It is a spark in the dark. The vintage colored pencil style captures the interior of the hut in the evening with a slightly warmer tone. The firelight seems a bit stronger, the shadows a bit less oppressive. The men are still gaunt, still hollow-eyed, but their posture has changed. They sit a little straighter. The drill has pulled their spines upright. They hold their heads differently. They are soldiers, not just refugees. Outside, the freeze returns with the sunset. The mud hardens. The footprints left on the parade ground, thousands of them, a chaotic record of the day's order, freeze into stone. They become a jagged topography of trapped movement. The wind blows over them, smoothing the edges with a dusting of fresh snow. The temperature drops. The icicles that formed on the eaves of the huts during the day stop dripping. They lengthen, sharp stalactites of clear ice that catch the last light of the moon. The moon is waning now. It rises late, a crooked sliver of bone in the sky. It sheds a weak light on the rows of huts. The camp is silent again, but the silence feels different. It is the silence of a machine that has been turned off for the night, cooling down, waiting to be restarted in the morning. It is a pregnant silence, full of potential kinetic energy. General Washington watches from his window. He sees the change. He sees the lines forming. He hears the cadence. He knows that the army is being forged. The fire of the forge is not hot, it is freezing cold. The hammer is the drill. The anvil is the valley. The iron is the men. They are being beaten into shape. It is a brutal process. Impurities are being driven out. The weak, the faint-hearted, the sick are falling away. What remains is the core, the hard, tempered steel. The narrative voice describes the texture of the blue book. It is not a printed book yet. It is scraps of paper, written in French, translated to English, copied by hand by shivering aides. The ink freezes in the wells. The paper is damp, but the words are absolute. Chapter 1, of the arms and accoutrements. Chapter 2, of the formation of a company. The words are the code that programs the machine. The sensory focus returns to the hands of the soldiers. They are calloused, cracked, stained with black powder and red clay. They handle the muskets with a new familiarity. The weapon is no longer a heavy burden, it is an extension of the arm. They clean the locks with pieces of rag. They oil the springs with animal fat if they can find it. They polish the barrel with sand. The metal begins to shine. In the dark huts, the firelight catches the glint of the polished iron. A row of muskets leaning against the wall, gleaming softly. It is a visual promise of violence to come. The wind shifts to the west. It brings a scent of moisture, of distant rain. The air feels heavy, pregnant with the coming spring. But winter is not done, it has claws. A sudden squall blows in, dropping inches of wet, heavy snow on the camp. The white blanket returns, covering the mud, covering the parade ground. It is a setback. The drill must stop for a day. The men retreat to the huts, but the pattern has been set. The snow cannot erase the muscle memory. The lines are drawn in the mind, if not on the ground. The camera pans over the sleeping camp. The roofs are white again. The smoke rises. The sentries pace their beats. Now they pace with a measured stride. Step, step, turn, step, step. They carry their muskets at the correct angle. They challenge the darkness with a sharper voice. Who goes there? The answer is the wind, but the question is asked with authority. The seventh part of the story emphasizes this subtle, grinding transition. It is the pivot point of the winter. The bottom has been reached and the slow, painful climb out has begun. It is not a climb towards warmth yet, but towards purpose. The sleep formula remains intact. The repetition, the monotony, the cold atmosphere. But the content has shifted from passive suffering to active reconstruction. The night stretches on. The icicles grow longer. The mud waits under the snow. The Baron sleeps in his quarters, dreaming of lines and angles. The men sleep in the straw, their bodies twitching as they rehearse the motions of the day in their dreams. Poise, cock, fire. The army is dreaming of war. The visual image fades slowly. The The sharp lines of the drill soften into the darkness. The blue-gray tones of the night reclaim the valley. The wind whispers through the stiff branches of the trees, a sound like a broom sweeping a floor, preparing it for the next day's work. The valley is a workshop, and the work is not done. The season shifts, not with a burst of warmth, but with a change in the texture of the air. It is March, the month of the slow, grinding transition. The iron grip of the deep freeze begins to loosen, finger by finger, releasing the valley into a state of wet, chaotic purgatory. The sky remains a heavy ceiling of gray, but it is a different shade of gray now, lighter, more translucent, like a sheet of wet paper held up to a window. The clouds are no longer the solid, slate slabs of January. They are ragged, weeping masses that drag their bellies across the tops of the hills. The precipitation changes. The silence of the falling snow is replaced by the relentless, rhythmic drumming of the rain. It is a cold rain. It is a rain that is barely liquid, hovering just a degree above freezing. It falls in sheets, sweeping across the encampment in waves of gray mist. It soaks the logs of the huts, turning the wood dark and spongy. It saturates the thatch and the shingles, finding every gap that the ice had previously sealed. Inside the huts, the sound is constant. Drip, drip, drip. A torture of water. The dry, dusty interior of the winter becomes a damp, moldy cave. The floor, which was hard as rock, begins to soften. The surface turns to slime. The straw bedding absorbs the moisture from the air and the ground, becoming a heavy, matted mass that smells of rot and earth. The visual landscape of the vintage colored pencil style undergoes a transformation. The sharp, white edges of the winter are gone. The paper is now covered in soft, smudged washes of earthy tones, raw umber, sepia, ochre, and slate blue. The artist uses a wet brush to blend the charcoal, creating a hazy, washed-out effect that mimics the fog and the rain. There are no crisp lines. Everything is blurred, damp, and heavy. The trees are black ink blots bleeding into the gray sky. The huts are dark mounds, rising from the mud. The mud is the defining element of this chapter. It is not merely dirt and water, it is a geological event. The great thaw turns the floor of the valley into a quagmire. The roads, previously paved with ice, dissolve into rivers of brown sludge. It is deep mud, ankle-deep, sometimes knee-deep. It has a suction to it, a greedy physical pull that fights every step. Walking becomes a battle against the earth itself. Squelch. Sucking pop. Squelch. The sound is wet and visceral. A soldier steps forward, his foot sinking into the mire. He pulls his leg up. The mud holds on. If he has a shoe, the mud tries to take it. If he has rags, they become sodden, heavy weights dragging at his ankles. The focus zooms in on the ground. The snow is receding, retreating into the shadows of the ravines and the north side of the trees. As it melts, it reveals the detritus of the winter. The archaeological layers of the encampment are exposed. Broken tools, shreds of clothing, bones of horses and cattle that were buried by the drifts, piles of refuse that were thrown out the doors and forgotten. The thaw brings them back. The camp is an open wound, weeping into the mud. And with the thaw comes the smell. The cold had been a sterilizer, freezing the scents of the army. The thaw releases them. The smell of the latrines overflowing with the meltwater, the smell of the awful pits, the smell of 12,000 men living in close confinement without baths. It is a heavy, sweet, sour stench that hangs low in the humid air. It permeates the wool of the uniforms, the wood of the huts, the very pores of the skin. The men breathe it in, tasting the decay of the winter. Yet the machine of the army continues to turn. Baron von Steuben does not stop for the mud. The drill continues. The grand parade is now a lake of brown soup. The men march in it. They splash through the puddles, their legs coated in muck. The discipline has hardened them to the point where they ignore the wetness. They execute the maneuvers with a grim determination. Shoulder, firelock. The muskets are slick with rain. The iron barrels rust overnight, turning a bright orange red that must be scoured away with sand and grease. The wood stocks swell with the moisture, making the fittings tight. The visual scene on the parade ground is one of endurance against the elements. The lines of men are dark stripes against the brown earth. The rain falls on their hats, running down the brims in steady streams. It runs down their noses, dripping off their chins. They do not wipe it away. They stand at attention, statues of wet wool and flesh. The steam rises from their bodies, a faint white aura that mingles with the fog. The commands echo through the mist, muffled and distorted by the heavy air. In the hospitals, the situation worsens. The dampness is the enemy of the sick. The camp fever, typhus, thrives in the wet, crowded conditions. The lice, the carriers of the disease, multiply in the warmth of the thaw. The men lie on the damp straw, burning with fever while the cold rain drums on the roof. The walls of the hospital huts are weeping moisture. Green mold begins to grow in the corners, a slow, creeping velvet that covers the logs. The doctors move like phantoms in the gloom, helpless against the invisible army of microbes. The river, the Schuylkill, begins to break up. It is a violent process. The sheet of ice that covered it for months cracks under the pressure of the rising water. Giant slabs of ice, white and jagged, grind against each other. The sound is a deep, resonant groaning, a geologic complaint that vibrates through the ground. Crunch, grind, boom. The river flows black and fast, carrying the ice flows downstream towards Philadelphia. The water is high, swollen with the melt from the mountains. It floods the low-lying areas of the camp, forcing some men to abandon their huts and seek shelter on higher ground. Inside the huts, the battle is against the leak. The roofs, built of rough shingles and held down by weight poles, are not watertight. The rain finds a way. It drips onto the fire, making it hiss and sputter. It drips onto the sleeping men. A soldier wakes up to the sensation of cold water hitting his forehead. Drop, drop, drop. He shifts his position, but the drip follows him, or another one begins. There is no dry place. The blankets are damp. The clothes are damp. The skin is white and puckered, like the skin of a washerwoman's hands. The men try to patch the roofs. They climb up on the slippery shingles, risking a fall. They stuff moss and mud into the holes, but the rain washes the mud away. They use pieces of bark, old canvas, anything to stop the water. It is a constant maintenance. The hut is a ship in a storm, taking on water from above. The fire inside smokes heavily, the damp wood refusing to burn cleanly. The smoke is thick and white, stinging the eyes even more than the dry smoke of winter. It hangs in the heavy air, refusing to rise through the chimney. The hunger has changed character. It is no longer the sharp, acute starvation of February. Some supplies have begun to trickle in. A wagon here, a wagon there, forcing its way through the mud, a barrel of flour, a herd of lean cattle. It is not enough, not nearly enough, but it is something. The men are not dying of hunger as fast as they were, but they are still hollow. They are sustaining life on a razor's edge. The focus shifts to a soldier eating a piece of fire cake that is soggy with rain. He holds it in a wet hand. The cake is dissolving into a paste. He eats it quickly before it falls apart. The texture is slime and grit. The visual detail lingers on the textures of the wet world. The bark of the oak trees is black with rain. The moss on the north side of the trees glows with a vibrant, electric green, the only bright color in the entire landscape. It is a sign of life, of the coming spring, but it looks alien and toxic in the gray light. The puddles on the ground reflect the sky, creating pools of light in the dark mud. When a raindrop hits a puddle, it creates concentric rings that expand and vanish, a mesmerizing pattern of geometry in the chaos. The days are longer now. The light lingers into the evening. This extends the time of the misery. In January, the dark was a mercy. It hid the world. Now the gray twilight stretches out, forcing the men to see the mud, the rot, and the gray faces of their comrades for hours longer. The boredom is heavy. There is nothing to do but drill, patch the roof, and wait. The cards are too damp to shuffle. The dice would sink in the mud. Conversation is a low murmur of complaints. Will it never stop? Rain before 7, fine before 11. It's been raining for 3 days. The camera pans over a soldier cleaning his musket in the doorway of a hut. He uses a piece of greased rag. He rubs the barrel with a slow, circular motion. He is obsessive about it. The rust is the enemy. If the musket rusts, it fails. If it fails, he is defenseless. He disassembles the lock. The screws are tiny, slippery with oil. He places them on a dry chip of wood. He cleans the spring. He cleans the pan. It is a meditation. The world is wet, but the mechanism must be dry. He breathes on the metal, polishing it until he can see his own distorted reflection in the steel. A gray ghost in the iron. The wind blows the rain sideways. It strikes the walls of the huts like gravel. It chills the air. This is the pneumonia weather. It is not cold enough to freeze, but cold enough to kill. A man wet to the skin at 35 degrees is in more danger than a dry man at 0. The hypothermia is insidious. It creeps in slowly. The shivering stops. The confusion sets in. The men watch each other for the signs. They huddle closer together at night, steaming like cattle in a barn. The smell of wet wool is overpowering. Somewhere in the distance, a crow calls. It is a wet, gurgling call. The bird sits on a high branch, shaking the water from its feathers. It looks down at the camp. It sees the movement of the tiny figures in the mud. It sees the smoke rising and flattening out in the rain. It sees the lines of the drill. It is an observer of the slow, wet pageant. The narrative voice describes the sensation of boots that have never dried. The leather shrinks as it dries and swells as it wets. It rubs the skin raw. The blisters turn into open sores. The mud gets into the sores. The infection starts. A red line creeping up the ankle. The doctors have no medicine for this. They say, keep it dry. A cruel joke. There is no dry. The evening meal is prepared. A pot of watery soup. The rain drips into the pot as it is carried from the fire to the mess. The soup is diluted by the sky. The men drink it from their tin cups. The metal of the cup is cold against the lip. The liquid is warm, but it tastes of iron and smoke. They wipe their mouths with the back of their hands, smearing the soot and the rain. Night falls. The darkness is absolute but wet. The ground shines faintly in the dark. The sound of the rain intensifies. It becomes a roar, drowning out the snores of the sleepers, the coughing of the sick, the sentry's challenge. It is a wall of sound. The sleep formula embraces this white noise. It is consistent, rhythmic, unending. It is a lullaby of water. Inside a hut, a soldier lies awake. He listens to the drip. He counts the drops. 1, 2, 3. He stares up into the darkness, imagining the water gathering on the shingle, finding the path of least resistance, swelling into a droplet and falling. He puts his hand out to catch it. Splat. Cold water on the palm. He wipes it on his blanket. He rolls over. He tries to sleep. The camera pulls back, rising into the rain. The camp becomes a smudge of charcoal on wet paper. The fires are dim, struggling against the damp. The smoke is beaten down by the rain. The valley is a bowl of water and shadow. The army is submerged. They are the inhabitants of a sunken city, waiting for the waters to recede. The transition is slow. The mud will not dry for weeks. The sickness will not fade until the sun returns, but they are still there. The drill has given them a spine of iron to hold them up in the mud. They do not dissolve. They are wet, cold, hungry, and sick, but they are a single unit now. The suffering is shared. The mud is shared. The rain is shared. Part 8 ends with the image of a single raindrop hanging from the tip of a bayonet. It reflects the gray world upside down. It hangs there for a long moment, trembling in the wind, holding the weight of the storm in its surface tension. Then it falls. Another takes its place. The cycle continues. The rain falls on the just and the unjust, on the officer and the private, on the living and the dead. The night washes over Valley Forge, a cold, dark baptism. The earth begins to crust. The season of the deep mud, the season of the liquid floor, slowly yields to the season of drying. It is April now. The sun has gained a foothold in the sky, rising earlier, setting later, and casting a light that actually carries a hint of warmth. It is not a summer warmth, nor even a true spring warmth, but a pale, tentative heat that touches the skin like a dry hand. The mud in the streets of the log city begins to change state. The standing water evaporates, leaving behind a surface that cracks and fissures. It turns from a dark, glossy soup to a dull, gray-brown mosaic of dried clay. The ruts left by the wagons and the thousands of feet freeze not into ice, but into stone-like ridges of hardened earth. Walking changes from a slipping, sliding struggle to a stumbling, tripping march over uneven ground. The sound of the camp changes with it. The wet squelch is replaced by the dry crunch of boots on crumbling soil. The visual palette of the vintage colored pencil style shifts again. The heavy, wet washes of the previous month are gone. The artist now uses sharper points, creating intricate textures of cracked earth and rough bark. The colors are earthy and muted, raw sienna, burnt umber, yellow ochre, and a pale, dusty olive green. The sky is a lighter blue, often streaked with high, thin clouds that look like brushed cotton. The light is clearer, sharper, casting defined shadows that move like sundials across the walls of the huts. The river, the Schuylkill, has cleared of ice. It flows dark and steady, a muscular current moving towards the sea. And with the open water comes the first true harvest of the year. The shad are running. Millions of fish, driven by an ancient biological imperative, are swimming upriver from the ocean to spawn. They fill the river, a shimmering silver highway of life moving against the current. The soldiers stand on the banks. They do not have proper nets, or at least not enough of them. They use whatever they have, baskets, shirts tied between poles, old seines found in barns. They wade into the freezing water. Focus on the texture of the fishing. The water is still deadly cold, numbing the legs instantly. But the men do not care. They scoop the fish out. The shad are large, oily, and strong. They thrash in the nets, their scales flashing like coins in the sunlight. The colored pencil rendering catches these flashes, tiny strokes of pure white and metallic silver amidst the dark blue of the water. The men throw the fish onto the bank. A pile of silver grows on the mud. The smell of the camp changes. The heavy, rotting scent of the winter is cut by the clean, briny smell of fresh fish. The cooking fires are busy tonight. The shad are roasted on planks of wood near the flames or boiled in the kettles. The fish is bony, full of tiny, sharp spines that must be picked out with care. But the meat is rich. It is protein. It is fat. It is the fuel the army has been starving for. The men eat with a focused, silent intensity. The grease runs down their chins. They lick their fingers. The oil stains their clothes, adding another layer to the patina of grime, but this stain is a badge of survival. The caloric intake spikes. The hollow cheeks begin to fill out just slightly. The eyes lose that glassy, thousand-yard stare and regain a spark of focus. But the defining feature of April is not the fish, it is the discipline. The work of Baron von Steuben has taken root. The Grand Parade is no longer a muddy bog of confusion. It is a geometry of precision. The drying ground allows for sharper movements. The drill has moved beyond the basics of facing and loading. Now they are maneuvering. They are learning to move as a battalion. Watch the mechanism of the drill from a high angle. The blocks of men, blue and brown rectangles, move across the dry, cracked field. Platoon, wheel to the right, the command is shouted. The block pivots. The man on the inside of the turn takes small steps, marking time. The man on the outside of the turn lengthens his stride. The line remains straight. It swings like a gate. It is a thing of beauty in its mechanical perfection. The dust rises from their feet, a fine yellow powder that hangs in the sunlight. Forward march, the block moves forward, step, step, step. The rhythm is unified, thousands of feet striking the ground at the exact same instant. Thump, thump, thump. It is a heartbeat. It is the sound of a single, massive organism. The Baron rides his horse, a large gray beast that has also recovered some flesh with the spring grass. He watches with a critical eye. He does not yell as much anymore. He nods. He points. He corrects a detail. The Blue Book of Regulations is now being copied into the orderly books of every regiment. The code has been written. Now it is being executed. The officers who once thought drill beneath them are now leading the lines. They have learned that authority comes from competence, not just rank. They march with the men. They carry muskets to demonstrate the grip. The gap between the leader and the lead shrinks, bridged by the shared sweat of the parade ground. The landscape is waking up. It is a slow, cautious awakening. The trees are not yet in full leaf, but they are in bud. A haze of pale green and red surrounds the branches of the maples and oaks. It is a stippled effect in the drawing, millions of tiny dots of color applied over the gray skeletons of the trees. The undergrowth, cleared by the axes of the winter, begins to sprout with new briars and ferns. The ground, where the sun hits it, shows the first shoots of grass. It is a tentative green, pale and fragile, pushing up through the crust of the mud. The wind still blows, and it is still cold, especially in the shadows, but it lacks the biting malice of the winter wind. It is a blustery, active wind that dries the clothes and airs out the huts. The soldiers leave the doors of their cabins open during the day. The sunlight penetrates the gloom, revealing the interior of the dwellings. It illuminates the soot-stained walls, the matted straw, the piles of equipment. The men begin to clean. They sweep the dirt floors with brooms made of birch twigs. They air out their blankets. The spring cleaning is a ritual of reclaiming humanity. There is a rumor moving through the camp. It moves faster than the wind, quieter than the river. It is whispered over the fires, murmured in the ranks during the pauses in the drill. France, the Alliance, ships, King Louis, it is vague. No one has seen a treaty. No one has seen a French soldier, but the rumor is persistent. It acts as a psychic ballast. They are not alone. The world has not forgotten them. The suffering of the winter was not in vain. They are part of a larger game, a global chessboard. The men stand a little straighter. They polish their buttons with a little more care. If they are to be allies of a king, they must look like soldiers. The visual focus shifts to the details of repair. The army is mending itself. A soldier sits on a log in the sun. He is sewing. He has a needle, perhaps one he made himself from a piece of bone or wire and thread pulled from a raveled blanket. He is patching his breeches. He works with concentration. The needle goes in, the needle comes out. He pulls the thread tight. He is closing the gaps. He is sealing the holes where the winter got in. Next to him, another man is carving a piece of wood to replace a lost button. He shapes it carefully, drilling holes with the point of his knife. It is a small act of creation in a landscape of destruction. The health of the camp begins to stabilize. The typhus has burned itself out, or perhaps the fresh air and the sun have driven it back. The hospital huts are still full and men still die every day, but the rate has slowed. The dead are buried with more ceremony now. There is time to dig proper graves in the thawed earth. The chaplains read the service. The firing squads fire volleys over the graves. The sound of the muskets is sharp and clear, echoing off the hills. The smoke from the funeral volleys rises white and clean against the blue sky. General Washington rides through the camp. He is a constant presence. He rides slowly, acknowledging the salutes. His face is grave, etched with the lines of the winter's worry, but his eyes are clear. He sees the change. He sees the straight lines of the huts. He sees the clean muskets. He sees the piles of shad. He knows that the crisis has passed. The army did not dissolve. It solidified. It went into the fire as iron and has come out as steel. The days stretch out. The evenings are long and blue. The magic hour, the time between sunset and true dark, lasts for an hour or more. The sky turns a deep, luminous indigo. The stars appear one by one, not as cold, distant sparks, but as softer, warmer lights. The frogs in the wetlands near the river begin to sing. It is a chorus of high-pitched peeps and deep croaks. It is the sound of life returning to the valley. The soldiers listen to it. It is a better sound than the howling of the wolves. Inside the huts, the fires are smaller now. They are for cooking, not for survival. The men sit around the embers, but they are not huddled in a desperate pile. They sit with space between them. They have reclaimed their individual bodies. They talk. The silence of the starvation is broken. When do we march? Soon. Where to? Philly, to chase the British. I'm ready. The conversation is simple, but it is there. The mind is waking up along with the body. The texture of the sleep formula in this part is one of steady, rhythmic restoration. It is the feeling of a slow inhalation after a long, suffocating pause. The tension is releasing. The muscles are loosening. The narrative voice is calm, observational, detailing the small victories of the spring. The drying of a sock, the sharpening of a bayonet, the taste of a fish, the green of a leaf. The drill continues into the twilight. The officers want to use every minute of light. The men are tired, their legs ache from the marching, but it is a good tired. It is the fatigue of exertion, not the lethargy of starvation. They march back to their huts in formation. They stack their arms. The muskets lock together in pyramids, a forest of iron and wood. The camera pans over the camp at dusk. The smoke from the fires mixes with the mist rising from the river. It creates a soft, hazy layer over the valley. The sharp lines of the log huts are softened. The camp looks like a village, a permanent settlement. It has a sense of place. It is no longer a temporary shelter in the woods. It is Valley Forge. The name has gained weight. It has become a location on the map of history. A soldier stands guard near the artillery park. The cannons are lined up, their bronze barrels dull in the low light. He runs his hand along the cold metal of a 6-pounder. He feels the smoothness of the bronze. He looks at his own hand. It is rough, scarred, the nails broken, but it is strong. He makes a fist. He feels the tendon tighten. He is still here. The night settles in. It is cool, dipping towards freezing, but the frost is light. It is a sugar frost, delicate and white, dusting the grass but not killing it. The moon is a crescent waxing. It hangs over the Mount Joy Hill. The name of the hill no longer feels like an irony. There is no joy yet, but there is relief. There is survival. The narrative lingers on the sensory details of the night. The smell of the damp earth, the smell of the new grass, the smell of the wood smoke, the sound of the river flowing, the sound of 12,000 men sleeping. It is a peaceful sound, a rhythmic, collective breathing that rises and falls with the breeze. The wolves are further away now. They have retreated deep into the forest. The presence of the organized army, the noise of the drill, the smell of the black powder has pushed them back. The wilderness has been tamed, not by conquering it, but by enduring it. The circle of light around the camp has expanded. As the ninth part draws to a close, the focus is on stability. The erratic, dangerous fluctuations of the winter are over. The graph line has flattened out. The army is a known quantity. They have their regulations, they have their drill, they have their food, they have their coats mostly. They are ready to be used, but for now they sleep. They gather their strength. They let the spring seep into their bones, replacing the cold with the slow, steady warmth of the turning earth. The final image of Part 9 is of a single bud on an oak tree, right above a sentry's head. It is tightly furled, a small knot of potential energy. In the moonlight, it looks like a small, silver bullet. It is waiting for the right moment to open, just like the army below it. The night holds them both in its cool, blue hands. The green returns. It does not return as a gentle wash of color, but as a heavy, encroaching tide. The month of May arrives in Pennsylvania, and with it, the canopy of the forest closes overhead. The delicate, stippled buds of April have exploded into broad, waxy leaves of deep viridian and olive. The light that reaches the floor of the valley is no longer the stark, blinding glare of the winter sun, nor the gray diffusion of the snow clouds. It is a dappled, filtered light, moving in shifting pools of gold and shadow across the roofs of the log city. The air has thickened. It holds the moisture of the river and the transpiration of the millions of new leaves, creating a humid, somber warmth that settles over the encampment like a heavy wool blanket. The visual style of the colored pencil drawing undergoes its final transformation. The stark contrasts of black charcoal and white paper are replaced by rich, saturated layers of green, sap, and earth tones. The artist presses hard with the green pencils, building up the density of the foliage until the woods surrounding the camp look like a solid wall of vegetation. The shadows are no longer blue, but a deep, warm purple, hiding the recesses of the forest where the wolves have retreated. The camp itself, once a stark grid of dark lines against white snow, is now blending into the landscape. The log huts, weathered and gray, look like natural formations, like rocky outcrops rising from a sea of tall grass. The mud has dried completely. It has turned to dust. A fine yellow-brown powder covers everything. It puffs up with every footstep, hanging in the still air, catching the shafts of sunlight. The soldiers move through this dust. They are no longer the huddled, shivering shapes of the winter. They are upright. They are mobile. They have shed the layers of blankets and rags. They wear their coats or simply their shirts, the linen stained with the sweat of labor and the dust of the parade ground. The silence of the deep freeze has been replaced by a new soundscape, the low, constant buzzing of insects. Flies, bees, and cicadas create a drone that serves as a backdrop to the human activity, a sonic texture that is hypnotic and relentless. On the 6th of May, the routine of the drill is broken by a different kind of order. The word has come down officially. The alliance is real. The King of France has recognized the independence of the states. It is a geopolitical shift that means little to the stomach of a private soldier, but it means everything to the war. To celebrate, there is no feast, for there is still little food. There is no wine, for there is no money. There is only the discipline. The celebration is a ritual of gunpowder and geometry. The army assembles on the grand parade. The ground is hard and dry. The lines are straighter than they have ever been. Baron von Steuben rides his gray horse, watching the fruits of his winter labor. The men stand in two ranks, a double line of blue and brown stretching for nearly a mile. They are a single entity. At a signal, a cannon shot that booms lazily in the warm air, the ceremony begins. It is the feu de joie, the fire of joy. It is not a volley, it is a ripple. The first man on the right of the front rank fires his musket into the air. Bang! Immediately the man next to him fires. Bang! Then the next. Bang! The fire runs down the line, a domino effect of explosions traveling at the speed of human reaction. It sounds like a giant canvas ripping, a continuous tearing crackle that moves from right to left, then swings to the second rank and comes back. The smoke puffs up in a running wave, a white serpent rising from the ranks. It drifts over the heads of the men, dissolving into the green trees. When the firing stops, the cheering begins, but even the cheering is drilled. It is not a chaotic roar of happiness, it is a command. Long live the King of France, the army shouts it in unison. It is a wall of sound, a single percussive shout that hits the hills and echoes back. Huzzah, 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 3 cheers, precise, rhythmic, measured. The joy is contained within the structure of the army. They celebrate by proving they are no longer a mob. They are a machine. The smoke from the feu de joie lingers in the humid air, smelling of sulfur and burnt paper. It mixes with the dust. The sun beats down. The men sweat. It is a hot sweat distinct from the cold, clammy sweat of the fever. It runs down their backs, soaking the waistbands of their breeches. They stand at attention for hours, baking in their wool coats, enduring the heat just as they endured the cold. This is the new test, the test of the summer soldier. After the celebration, the waiting returns, but it is a different kind of waiting. It is the waiting of a coiled spring. The British are leaving Philadelphia. The intelligence reports come in daily. The enemy is packing up. They are abandoning the capital. They are moving towards New York. The vacuum is opening. The time to move is approaching. The camp begins to dismantle itself. The order is given to strike the baggage. The few wagons that have returned are loaded. The heavy iron kettles, the ones that boiled the leather soup and the fire cakes, are stacked. They clang together, a dull, metallic tolling. The tools are gathered, the axes that felled the forest, the shovels that dug the latrines and the graves. They are worn, the handles polished smooth by the grip of callous hands. The soldiers look at their huts. These small, dark boxes have been their universe for 6 months. They have been the womb and the tomb. They know every knot in the wood, every draft in the chinking, every stain on the floor. Leaving them is a strange sensation. There is no nostalgia, but there is a recognition of the shelter they provided. The men strip the huts of anything useful: a loose board, a piece of leather hinge, a good stone from the hearth. The huts are left as empty shells, dark squares of shadow standing open to the summer air. On the 19th of June, exactly 6 months to the day from their arrival, the order comes: march. The drums begin to beat. It is not the slow, mournful cadence of a funeral, nor the frantic beat of a battle. It is the steady, walking pulse of the march. Rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat. The sound vibrates through the soles of the shoes, for many now have shoes or at least new moccasins. The columns form up on the parade ground. The dust rises in a choking cloud. The sun is high and fierce, bleaching the color out of the scene, turning the green world into a hazy, overexposed photograph. General Washington sits on his horse by the roadside. He watches them pass. He sees the difference. In December, they were a dying organism, bleeding into the snow, shuffling in silence, heads down. Now they walk with a cadence. Their heads are up. Their muskets are carried at the correct angle. They are thin, yes. Their uniforms are patched, yes, but they move with a unified purpose. They are the Continental line. The winter has burned away the fat, the weakness, the hesitation. What is left is the bone and the muscle of the revolution. The column stretches out, a long, sinuous snake moving away from the river, moving up the Gulf Road, moving east. They leave the valley behind. The sound of the marching feet fades. The thud-thud-thud grows quieter. The creak of the wagons diminishes. The dust cloud settles slowly back onto the road. The drums become a faint, rhythmic tapping in the distance, like a woodpecker in the deep woods, before fading into the silence of the afternoon. The camera of the narrative does not follow the army. It stays behind. It remains in the camp. The silence returns to Valley Forge. It is immediate and profound. The shouting is gone. The chopping is gone. The drilling is gone. The valley is abandoned. The visual scene is one of stillness. The rows of log huts stand silent and empty like a ghost town of the ancients. The doors hang open, swinging slightly in the warm breeze. The windows, mere holes in the logs, stare out like dark eyes. Nature begins the work of reclamation immediately. A crow lands on the ridgepole of a hut. It caws, a harsh sound that echoes through the empty street. It hops down to the ground, pecking at a crumb of hardtack left in the dust. A squirrel runs along the top of a wall, chattering. The animals are returning. They sense the absence of the predator. The grass, which had been trampled into mud and dust by thousands of feet, begins to spring back. In the corners of the huts where the logs meet the earth, green shoots of weeds are already pushing up. They will grow tall in the summer heat. They will choke the doorways. They will cover the hearths. Vines of poison ivy and wild grape begin to reach out from the tree line, sending their tendrils towards the rough bark of the cabins. They will wrap the city in green. They will pull it down, log by log, back into the earth. The camera drifts slowly through the camp. It enters one of the huts. The interior is cool and dark. The smell of the army is fading, replaced by the smell of dry earth and old wood. On the wall, the charcoal marks counting the days are still visible. A row of black slashes, a record of endurance. A spider has spun a web across the corner of the bunk. The web catches a ray of sunlight, glittering like the silk of a fine dress. It is a new resident. The fire pit in the center of the floor is cold. A pile of gray ash remains, the ghost of the last fire. A single charred stick rests on top. It will not be lit again. The wind blows through the chinks in the logs, stirring the ash, sending a small gray cloud swirling into the shaft of light. Outside, the river flows. The Schuylkill is swollen and brown with the summer rains. It moves past the camp, past the empty forge, past the hills. It is indifferent to the history that happened on its banks. It flowed before the army came, and it flows now that they are gone. The sound of the water is a constant, soothing rush, a white noise that smooths over the memories of the pain. The vintage colored pencil drawing begins to fade. The colors desaturate. The vibrant greens of the summer leaves turn to a pale, washed-out olive. The dark browns of the logs turn to a soft, neutral gray. The image is becoming a memory. The details blur. The sharp lines of the huts soften, merging with the shadows of the trees. The narrative voice slows down, becoming heavier, deeper. It speaks of the legacy of the silence. The 6 months of the encampment were not a time of battle, but a time of becoming. The victory was not in taking a hill, but in standing on it. The victory was in the breathing, in the waking up, in the staying. The sun begins to set on the empty camp. The long shadows stretch out again, reaching across the parade ground, touching the empty headquarters. The light turns golden, then amber, then deep blue. The heat of the day dissipates, rising into the atmosphere, leaving behind a warm, still evening. The fireflies begin to come out. They flash in the tall grass, tiny sparks of cold light that mimic the campfires that used to burn there. But these fires offer no heat. They are signals in the dark. The ghosts of the winter, the 2,000 men who died and were buried in unmarked graves, are part of the soil now. The roots of the new grass hold them. The trees stand guard over them. They are the foundation of the valley. The army has marched away to fight at Monmouth, to fight at Yorktown, to finish the war. But a part of them remains here, frozen in the amber of the story. The visual field darkens. The paper texture becomes dominant again, a rough, dark grain that absorbs the image. The huts are barely visible now, just geometric suggestions in the gloom. The sky is a void of charcoal dust. The only sound is the wind in the leaves, a soft, sibilant sh-h-h-h-h-h-h. It is the sound of the earth sleeping. The sleep formula is complete. The cycle of the seasons has turned from the gray of winter to the green of summer and now back to the black of night. The struggle is over. The pain is gone. There is only the quiet, the deep, resonant quiet of a place that has seen too much and is now resting. The camera pulls back, higher and higher, until the huts are just texture on the forest floor, until the river is a silver ribbon in the dark, until the valley is a sleeping giant breathing slowly under the stars. The story ends where it began, in the stillness. The last image is of the dust settling on the road, undisturbed, smooth, and silent.